Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3, the game streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios. Ian is here today. Ian, we have a football coach of the Tennessee Titans. Congratulations to the Tennessee Titans. And let me say this. I was at the Predators game yesterday. I'm going to throw me and Gentry Estes under the bus here. I was at the Predators game yesterday when a notification popped up on John Glennon's phone, and the notification was that the Titans were hiring Brian Callahan as their head coach. And all of a sudden it was hey, all this talking we had just done for 20 minutes leading up to that, forget about it. Brian Callahan's going to be the coach. And let me just say this. First and foremost, congratulations to the Titans. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the Tennessee Titans ran a legitimate and competent search and landed on a realistic, legitimate, upside offensive coordinator candidate. And it didn't leak out. And even though we kind of got some hints here or there, like when they said they were going to interview David Shaw, it was like, okay, they've probably figured out who they want. And they were bringing Callahan back for a second interview. But the cat never really got out of the bag, right? There were some hints here that, they might like Callahan, they might not. But again, as far as running a dysfunctional search, which we have seen plenty of time in our lives, the Tennessee Titans did not do that. As far as hiring the dumbest candidate on the board, which they could have done, the Tennessee Titans did not do that. A defensive coach, the Tennessee Titans did not do that. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that Dan Quinn interview for Wednesday, that was a leverage play. That was hey, just so you know, we do have other options in case this doesn't work, but we really want our guy in our building, and it sounds like they got him. So I have no idea if Brian Callahan's going to be a great coach or not. Neither do you. Quite frankly, neither do they. But congratulations to them for running a competent search. This has been an organization that for the last 18 months, since they fired John Robinson in the middle of the season while they were sitting in first place, has done everything stupidly. I mean, we can even go further back. The Julio Jones trade, the A.J. Brown fiasco, like all of that dumb. And this, a big thing, a coaching search, was done well. So I congratulate the Titans on that. Number two, I support the hiring of Brian Callahan as the Titans head coach. He was not my top choice. It was Bobby Sloak of the Texans. But, as I said yesterday, I can live with Brian Callahan. I can get excited about Brian Callahan, which is what I said yesterday. I could not get excited or live with the offensive coordinator of the Panthers who finished 32nd in the league last year. I'm not doing a defensive coach so that just in case Will Levis gets good, then all of a sudden the offensive coordinator who helped Will Levis get good leaves, and that would have driven me crazy. So I like the system that Brian Callahan runs, the Shanahan-McVay guru system. I like the tree that he is from. You know, one guy has failed from the tree. Two, if you want to count Arthur Smith, because technically he worked a year under LaFleur and ran that offense, but I'm not sure I really count Arthur on that tree. One guy, Nathaniel Hackett. And that was a whole fakakta situation anyways. But again, who knows? Matt LaFleur, Zach Taylor, Kevin O'Connell, all have had success. And he's up next. Now, I have no idea how Brian Callahan will handle the spotlight, the management of the entire organization, the gossip, all of the things that have to be dealt with. I mean, let's just use gossip. And the answer is yes. There's internal gossip, and not just inside the locker room with the team, but there are hundreds of employees who work in that building, and it's managing that. Then there's the outside gossip. So-and-so's talking to Diana Rossini, so-and-so's talking to Adam Schefter, so-and-so's. It's a lot of work. And then all the gossip talk and everything else. You see what I'm saying? So how's he going to handle that? I don't know. We really never know how somebody is going to be able to handle these things until they become a head coach. And even then, there's no sure guarantee that it's going to work. I thought Arthur Smith was a slam dunk hire. Pete Carroll was a disaster in New England and was a Hall of Fame coach in Seattle. But here's how Brian Callahan is going to be judged as head coach of the Tennessee Titans. The quarterback. He will be judged on Will Levis. If Will Levis pops and becomes an elite quarterback in the NFL, a la Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, then he'll probably be the coach of the Titans for the next 15 years. If he doesn't, unless they get insanely lucky, like drafting Tom Brady in the 6th round or hitting on Brock Purdy or signing Drew Brees, whatever it may be, unless they get insanely lucky, if Levis doesn't work, 2-3 years from now, we could be sitting in the exact same spot talking about some guy who today, right now, might be an assistant quarterbacks coach at Eastern Lafayette State Tech. That's how fast these things change. When I was in college, for instance, and I know I was in college 10 years ago, but when I was in college, the Louisville football program had Sharon Moore as a graduate assistant, Shane Steichen as a quality control guy, and Will Stein, the offensive coordinator at Oregon, as the backup quarterback. So these things happen quickly, but it's all about Levis. This is a QB league, and where the Titans sit right now, the Titans might have a quarterback. This quarterback has everything that can't be taught. Forget about what everybody says about Will Levis. For some reason, I feel like every single person I talk to, they have their mind made up on Will Levis one way or another, right? There's the Mel Kiper Jr. types or the Kentucky fans or Levis is great. He's going to be awesome. They just need to protect him. They need to get him weapons. They need to help him. It's not his fault. And then there's the people that are, I don't see it with Will Levis. I just don't see it. I'm like, did you see the end of the Miami game? Because that did happen. That's important to note. Not everybody can do what he did at the end of that Miami game. Will Levis has what you cannot be taught: size, athleticism, arm strength, the ability to throw from different angles, toughness, reliability. Levis has all those things. I have not heard one person tell me that they could not count on Will Levis, whether it's Liam Cohen, Mark Stoops, people with the Titans. Those are the things you can't motivate somebody who doesn't want to be motivated. But that's not the problem with Will Levis. What Will Levis needs work on are fundamentals, layering the football, decision-making, better talent around him, better protection, perhaps a more innovative, more modern scheme. And don't forget this, somebody around him to calm him down. I talked about the Tampa Bay game, where once the game started to get out of hand, after Mike Evans connected on a touchdown and it became a 2-score game in the fourth quarter, it was obvious Will Levis was trying to get it all back on one throw. And I said after that game, just watching the tape, that I felt like Will Levis had anxiety. And again, it's not the anxiety of he's afraid or it's the anxiety of I have to right now go out there and win this game on this next throw. And it's like, hey, easy, big guy. Let the game come to you a little bit. Just chill out, just calm down, let it come to you. And that's Brian Callahan's job. And it's not just Callahan and Levis, but it is Callahan and the entire support system that he puts around Will Levis. The quarterback coach, the offensive coordinator, the backup quarterback, the assistant quarterbacks coach, the wide receivers coach to work with the receivers to make sure they're on the same page as Levis, the offensive line coach, the offensive line men. Do you need a veteran center? If you're going to draft a tackle in the first round and you've got a young guy as your left guard, you probably want a steady veteran in there, right? All of this is about the QB. And Brian Callahan has the experience that the resume would argue he's ready for this task. Can he do it? I don't know. You don't know. They don't know. Deep down inside, he probably thinks he can do it. He doesn't know. But that's the job. And so, as far as, Jared, what do you think of the hire of Brian Callahan? I don't do things like say, that's a home run hire. That's a can't miss slam dunk. Oh my. I don't do that. Now, what I do say is there are really, really stupid hires. Like hiring Jeff Saturday would be really, really, really stupid. But I don't do the, oh yeah, this can't miss. Any of these. Harbaugh to the Chargers. I don't know. We'll see. But as far as a resume is concerned, Brian Callahan's got a resume that can get me excited. Because I know the path for this team to be successful in the future revolves around the quarterback. This team is basically, outside of a defensive tackle, this team is basically an expansion team, and Will Levis is the number one pick. And Brian Callahan is the one to figure out how to make him one of those guys that we watch these Sundays in January and say, gosh, I wish I had that guy on my team. That's Brian Callahan's job. I don't know if he'll succeed or not, but he's got a resume that says he's ready for this. And so I want to congratulate him getting a head coaching job. But most importantly, I want to congratulate the Titans because once again, they ran a competent search that ended up with a result that makes sense. Does it mean it'll work? I don't know. But all of the steps to get there have been correct. And that is a sign of an organization that has taken its head out of its ass and might be getting on the track to success. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, and we will get to your phones today at 615-737-1025, but we still got a lot of talking that we got to do as we react to the hiring of the new Titans coach. I know it's not official yet. They still have to do the second interview, I think, with Thomas Brown in order to, do that. And then I'm sure there's some contract stuff and some HR stuff and everything else. I'm sure it'll be official probably around like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock tonight. And then I would assume a press conference probably Thursday, I would guess, but I don't know any of that. 615-737-1025. Coming up next, there are things that people are really excited about when it comes to Brian Callahan that I don't care about at all. And then there are some things that really excite me about his potential, again, to turn Will Levis into a franchise quarterback. We'll do that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Super Bowl winning coach, Gary Kubiak, who is on the line with us, coached with him in Denver when Brian Callahan was a offensive assistant. So what are the Titans getting in this young man and Brian Callahan?
Well, they're getting a good one, I can tell you that. First off, I was with Brian those couple of years in Denver that I was there. He was an offensive assistant for me, but in all honesty, he was like Peyton's right-hand man. I mean, he did a lot of work for Peyton in preparation, game plan-wise each week, obviously doing a lot of work as a coach for me and the staff, but had a lot to do with Peyton's preparation. I know it was even before I got there. And, when I came to Denver, I was trying to, coexist with what I did offensively and keep what Peyton was doing offensively. And my go-between during that transition was Brian and Greg Napper. So great young man. I know his dad. I mean, just quality football coach, quality person. He's been around some good football minds. And I really thought it was going to happen last year, to be honest with you. A few people called me about him. So I'm happy for him. You guys are getting a great kid, very knowledgeable football coach. You'll be proud of him.
There you go. It was Gary Kubiak on with Chase and Joe today. By the way, listen to that full interview with Gary Kubiak. Go on your podcast, wherever you get them. Chase and Big Joe today had Gary Kubiak. It was excellent. And you hear right there, he's like, hey, Tennessee, great hire. First and foremost, Gary Kubiak is not doing that interview unless he wants to take time out of his day to go on the radio to talk about the guy that the Titans hired. And so that, again, that's a good sign. Now, there's a bunch of things about Brian Callahan's background and his resume and everything else that people are either getting excited about or they're making a big deal about, and I can't tell you what to care about. I am only going to tell you what really matters to me in order for him to be successful, and then the other stuff that I'm like, whatever. So here's what I like. Number one, I like his experience. He has been a lot of different places. Not all of them good, by the way, which is how almost everybody in the NFL is. When you read their resumes, it's like, yeah, they were on that Detroit Lions team and they all got fired. That happens all the time. We were joking last week, Ian and I were, that when Nick Saban left Ohio State or when Pete Carroll left Ohio State, the other guy replaced him. Floyd told me that they were going to hire Bill Belichick to coach the secondary in Minnesota under Bud Grant. Under Les Steckel, excuse me. Belichick came in town, didn't like it because his wife thought it was too cold. After he had agreed to be the coach, Belichick goes back to Parcells with the Giants. They hire Pete Carroll. It's just things like that, but it's not all great. But that's okay. Because all of that experience means two things. Number one, it means he knows a lot of assistant coaches, right? I worked with this guy with the Raiders, who worked with this guy who's currently in Minnesota. And I know he is calling me saying, Brian, you have got to hire this guy as your inside linebacker coach. Well, I trust this guy. He knows ball. I worked with him with the Raiders, and he swears up and down about this guy. Put him on the staff. And what he knows by all that experience is probably who would be a good coach, and also as equally as important of who would be a good coach is who would not be a good coach. And again, also knows people who will probably shoot him straight about who's a good coach and who's not. And then number two, when he's been to all those places, well, he's seen a lot of problems, and problems need fixing. For instance, the Titans have an offensive line problem. Guess what the Bengals have had to work on since the second they got there? You remember the 9 sacks in the playoff game. So that's a problem he's dealt with before. So the experience is very important. Number two, his lineage is important to me. Now, the whole being a coach's son thing, that, as far as he was born with the genetic ability to be a coach. I don't believe in that. But what I do believe in is that he's going to have somebody who's looking after him. Somebody that can say, this is what happened to me. Be careful because I saw this when I was coaching, and those are always important. And three, the Bengals. This is important to me. And you're going to say, Jared, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins are not coming with him. And you're right. But the Bengals actually have one of, traditionally, the smallest scouting staffs in the NFL. In fact, I don't want to take shots at the Bengals because now they've got Joe Burrow, so they're good. But Floyd used to always joke about how cheap the Brown family was. And we all know they have a reputation for how cheap they are and how poor they are in terms of NFL owners. So they didn't really have much of a scouting staff there. So in Cincinnati, when you sign up to coach, you are going to be charged with a lot of the scouting responsibilities as soon as the season is over, which means he's got experience doing that. And that's going to be important because as the head coach of this team, they're going to have to get some serious personnel work done. It is obvious that the Titans don't believe in farming out personnel to one side of the building and farming out coaching to the other, which means that Brian Callahan's going to have to be very involved. And that's good. Now, here's what I don't care about. I do not care about the success with Peyton Manning or with Joe Burrow. And I know football's a team sport. But Ed Orgeron and Adam Gase have championship rings because of those two. And quite frankly, I think both guys were total stooges. So I'm sure it was a great experience. And those guys probably taught him a lot of what to do, specifically Peyton. But as far as, hey, this guy has a track record of success because of Peyton Manning, I'm like, whoa now. Like, whoa now. You want to start hiring coaches that have experience with Tom Brady? I thought so. So I don't care about that. Number 2, the play calling. The whole, he's never called plays before, Jared. That's not nothing, and there is an art to play calling. And some guys stink at it. But in today's NFL with this tree, this is the way it works. Mike McDaniel doesn't call plays. Then he gets the head coaching job in Miami. He calls the plays. Kevin O'Connell doesn't call plays with L.A. He gets the head coaching job. Now he calls the plays. Zach Taylor the same way. So just because Brian Callahan doesn't call the plays doesn't mean that he can't graduate to the spot where now let's get him the big laminated card and go ahead and call the plays. And those guys have been just fine. Nathaniel Hackett, for instance, had called plays before when he was in Jacksonville with Blake Bortles and had actually been kind of successful. And then he takes a head coaching job, and that's an unmitigated disaster. So while, again, he didn't call the plays is not nothing, it's not everything either. That's not that big of a deal. And I feel like, I assume he should be able to call plays. And then the other thing that I absolutely do not care about is this idea that T. Higgins might want to come here now, and other potential players coming from the Bengals. I'm sure there will be some guys that he's crossed paths with in Cincinnati or even with the Raiders 6 years ago that might be still kicking around the league or whatever. But this idea that because Brian Callahan's here, you're going to get T. Higgins is ridiculous. This is not college football. This is the NFL. Money and draft picks are what decides who is going to be on your team. So instead of the idea of going and getting T. Higgins, which will cost you undoubtedly the 7th overall pick in this year's draft and probably $120 million, and quite frankly, I don't think Higgins is worth the 7th overall pick in the draft, you're better off thinking, you know what? This guy can get you the next T. Higgins in the 2nd round of this year's draft. This guy can figure out on the fly, hey, we studied this guy a lot. When we were thinking about trading for him when we were at Cincinnati, we ended up not trading for him. He's now a free agent. Now we can acquire him. You're more likely to do that than you are to all of a sudden take the Bengals' best players with you. Again, the Vikings didn't become a team of ex-Rams. Neither did the Bengals when Zach Taylor went over there. And sure, there are some guys that go from one team to the next, like Raheem Mostert running the ball for Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins, but it's not something where star players end up going to these other places. So I don't care about this whole, oh my God, he could bring T. Higgins, that's probably not going to happen. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, 615-737-1025. We will get to some of your phones, plus the next thing on the Brian Callahan discussion list. His dad as the offensive line coach. A lot of people are talking about it. Some reporting is his dad is coming. Some reporting is his dad isn't coming. We'll get to that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5-1063 The Game. Here on our program today, again, the Titans have a new head coach in Brian Callahan. It's Stillman and Company, 102.5-1063 The Game.
maybe Callahan is what they were looking for as far as offense is concerned or whatever. It'll be interesting to see if he brings his father along with him. In some interviews that I had read, he said it would be a dream one day to be able to coach with my dad. That would be a big blow for Cleveland if they were to lose Bill Callahan, who is as respected as anybody when it comes to offensive line run game coordinator stuff.
Look, I don't know what his contract situation is in Cleveland, but the bottom line is if a son wants to hire his father, I can't see any organization keeping that from happening if that's what they both want to happen. He's got to, he's the decision maker. It's got to be his decision to start off with. And B, his father's going to have to say yes. So, but I can't see, even if he's under contract with Cleveland, I can't see any way, even though they're in-state rivals and everything, I can't see any way Cleveland would stop him from going.
That's Coach Charlie Weiss this morning on Sirius XM NFL Radio. I think he got the Bengals and the Titans confused there when talking about in-state rivals, because the Titans are not in-state rivals with the Cleveland Browns. But, again, the chatter is Brian Callahan going to bring his dad, Bill, the old Raiders coach that knocked the Titans out of the AFC Championship game in 2002 and then got fired the next year? Are they going to bring him in to be the offensive line guru that this team needs? A lot of fans, if you don't get him, you got to get Mike Munchak. You got to this, you got to that. Let me say this. I have no idea. I saw one report, Sports Illustrated said that Cleveland is incredibly dedicated to keeping Brian Callahan. And then I saw another report from the guy that was on the radio in Cincinnati that was on the midday show today that said, oh, yeah, he's definitely going to go. I have no idea. And I will say this about the staff, the coaching staff. It is incredibly important to me that Brian Callahan get a very good coaching staff in here. Offensive line, offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, defense. Again, farm that side of the ball out. Wade Phillips, you're in as defensive coordinator. Just throwing that as a name. But here's what I'm not going to do. And this would be the case if I owned the football team too. I am not going to dictate to Brian Callahan who to hire. And I see there's a lot of this. His dad as the offensive line coach is something that a lot of people are making a big deal about right now, but even offensive coordinator. I'm seeing people saying they got to bring in Thomas Brown to be the offensive coordinator. They got to bring in Liam Cohen to be the offensive coordinator. I'm not doing any of that. Now, there's a couple of guys I would prefer that you not bring in, like Craig Aukerman. But other than that, I'm not going to sit there and micromanage this guy about his coaching staff, quite frankly, because as part of getting the job was probably in the interview process laying out, here's what I want on my coaching staff. And considering that this isn't Brian Callahan's first go-round through the interview cycle, he's probably thought a lot about who he wants to be on his coaching staff. So why, if this guy is convinced that Johnny Joe should be his offensive coordinator, why in the world would I say, nope, you need to hire Liam Cohen for Will Levis? But I'd rather hire this guy that I know is a good offensive coach, and I know he's, no, I want this guy. I'm sorry. I can't do that. So the staff itself is very important. And I am encouraged by the fact that because of his experience in the league, his lineage in the league, and again, how big now that Shanahan-McVay tree is, I feel confident that he can put together a good staff. But I can't micromanage the guy on his staff. I can't sit there and say, hey, you need to keep Charles London as the quarterback's coach because Charles London has a good relationship with Will Levis. I can tell you that Charles London has a good relationship with Will Levis. You can talk to Charles London about his relationship with Will Levis and if he sees the game the same way you do. But I am not going to tell Brian Callahan that you have to do anything. Because right now, even though he's a new hire, he does get the benefit of the doubt. It's the same benefit of the doubt that we gave last year to Rand Carthon when they went out and signed Andre Dillard, and they said, just trust us. I know he didn't play with the Eagles, but he's a former first-round pick. We think he's going to be a good pass protector for us. Just trust us. And we did. And then you lost that trust. So if he puts together a staff of bozos this time next year, we will be saying, fire the defensive coordinator, fire the offensive coordinator, get a better quarterbacks coach. You never should have gotten rid of Charles London. Well, sure. But right now, he gets the benefit of the doubt. And so I am not going to micromanage who he hires and say, oh, I can't hire that guy. Regardless of how we feel about his coaching staff that he puts together, he has to hire the right guys. And offensive coordinator is vitally important in these kind of systems, even though the OC won't call the plays, because there's kind of this good cop, bad cop thing that goes on with the OC and with the head coach. You know, in the defensive styles, it's more the OC and the quarterback's coach. And I listened to C.J. Stroud talk about it after the Ravens game about Gerard Johnson, their quarterback's coach, and Bobby Slowick, their offensive coordinator. And he was talking about how Gerard Johnson's the guy who's always told him, stay confident. He's the guy who's really pushed him to be confident and believe in himself. And then Slowick is the guy who's really tough on him, holds him accountable, you know, never lets him get too high. Again, good cop, bad cop. So whoever Brian Callahan hires, and it sounds to me like he's the bad cop in Cincinnati, and I would say, hey, if you're going to be the bad cop, you stay the bad cop. But hire a good cop as the offensive coordinator so that can be the relationship with Levis. So if Thomas Brown's that guy, great. If Charles London's that as the quarterback's coach, great. But I don't have any preconceived notions about telling him who those guys should be. So it's a wild and crazy way of saying that we will absolutely go over the coaching staff that he ends up hiring, but that where we sit right now with all these people like, here's my list for offensive coordinator. I'm like, calm down. Like, again, calm down. I know you can read a guy's resume and say, well, he coached here and so he should like him. But we don't know, again, the dynamics of what if they're both good cops? Then is that a bad idea? Phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. 615-737-1025. If you want to weigh in, 615-737-1025 here on this wonderful program. If you want to get in, text her into the text line. A lot of people are kind of critical here when it comes to the Titans. Says, you know, hey, Brian Callahan's offenses, Gator Tim says, Callahan's offenses in 5 years have finished 29th, 30th, and 28th without Joe Burrow. I mean, we can take the best players off of everybody's team and then see how they do. I understand what you're saying. And Josh McDaniels has been terrible without Tom Brady. But the question is, can this guy turn your guy into that guy? So that you say, yeah, you know, they're not very good without Will Levis, but when they have Will Levis, and that's the question for me. And I don't know the answer to that. Texter says, Jared, does the new coach have final say, or is it the GM that has final say on the coaches for hiring the staff? I think it's the coach. Now, the players, Amy will tell us, she said, later this week. So we'll see what ends up happening there. I assume it'll probably end up being Rand, but I don't know. One texter into the text line says, Callahan's biggest problem is that he's now the Titans head coach. Still a bottom-tier franchise that won't change. I mean, if he thought it was that bad, I'm not sure he would have taken the job. And you'd say, well, I mean, anybody would take the job to be head coach to make $10 million and all these, you know, whatever. But then again, if you're paying the head coach $10 million, then are you really a bottom-tier franchise because you're paying top dollar for your coach? Chris says T. Higgins will be tagged by the Bengals not leaving this year. I agree, but I do think T. Higgins will be tagged and traded. So I do think Higgins will be available. The problem is do you want to give up your second-round pick and then give him $120 million? Or could I get T. Higgins with my second-round pick and not have to pay him $120 million? 615-737-1025. More of your phones. Plus, there is something about what the Bengals were able to do, because I was not the biggest Zach Taylor fan for a while. But there is something the Bengals were able to do with Brian Callahan on that staff that really did stand out to me, that really was a big deal to me. And it wasn't the run that they had going to the Super Bowl in 2021. And it wasn't the incredible end of the year they had last year where they caught fire at the end and then they went to Buffalo and beat the crap out of the Bills in Buffalo in the playoffs and then had that another down to the wire showdown with Mahomes in the AFC title game. It's not that. We'll get to that next. Stillman & Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. FanDuel Sports Book is my official sportsbook app, and it should be yours too. If you've been watching the playoffs from the sidelines, there is still time to get in the game with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and my official sportsbook app. New customers bet this Sunday's conference championship games with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I heard Joe today talking about, I don't know about the NFC game, but I feel great about the Chiefs. I'm like, what? The AFC game's the game you want to pick? Give me San Francisco in the NFC game. That's the one I feel strongly about, even though I guess I didn't watch the same game everybody else did who keeps talking about how great Brock Purdy was. So if you want to follow my pick, go to FanDuel right now. Get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/JGM to join today. That's FanDuel.com/JGM and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 and over in present Tennessee. First online real money wager. Only $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call the Tennessee Red Line at 1-800-889-9789.
Coach Callahan, he worked with Joe Barrow, And Joe threw for like 80-some plus touchdowns, there in Cincinnati when Brian was there. They also, played in the Super Bowl. Callahan has worked with Peyton Manning. He's worked with Matthew Stafford. He's worked with Derek Carr. I mentioned Joe Burrow. So I think he has a track record and the ability to work with young quarterbacks. And I know the Tennessee Titans have Will Levis, who's a young quarterback who certainly could use the tutelage to continue to learn how to play the position in the National Football League and play it at a very high level. So I think he'll bring that experience. And then also, too, what he did with Jake Browning. Callahan did with Jake Browning this year. And to get him ready, to have him go out there and perform at the level that he played at. So I think when you factor all that in, particularly being able to work with young quarterbacks, I think that had a significant role in the hire there with the Tennessee Titans.
There you go. That was Torrey Holt this morning on Sirius XM NFL Radio talking about, hey, Brian Callahan, he worked with Joe Burrow, he worked with Peyton Manning, he worked with Derek Carr, he worked with Matthew Stafford. I don't really care about all that. I get it. Peyton Manning, I could have been his coach, and Peyton Manning would have been fine. Same with Joe Burrow. The one that really stands out to me is the one he mentioned last, which was Jake Browning. So, again, it's almost unfair when a great coach has a good player, and I don't know if Zach Taylor and Brian Callahan are great coaches or not. But it is almost sometimes unfair because it's like it takes away from the coach of, well, I mean, Phil Jackson had Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Not to mention that Michael couldn't win the big one before Phil, and Kobe couldn't win the big one before Phil. And then when Phil left and Rudy Tomjanovich came in, Kobe still couldn't win, and then they desperately brought Phil back. Forget about that. But he only wins because he's got Michael and Kobe. Okay. But there is something that has to be said about the job that they did this year in Cincinnati with Jake Browning. And that's kind of how I feel about Kevin O'Connell with the Vikings as well. Kirk Cousins goes down. They get Josh Dobbs off the street, and they are winning games with Josh Dobbs as the quarterback to at least keep them kind of in it towards the end of the year. And then they kind of got sick of Josh Dobbs, and they were rotating in the quarterbacks or whatever. But again, going back to Jake Browning, during the Monday Night Football game against Jacksonville, I sent out a tweet because I was just so impressed with how in command Jake Browning was that at 8:41 p.m. on December 4th, I said, if Will Levis ever gets Jake Browning's game control, he'll be a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. And what I meant by that was control of how everything is operating, where the ball is going, how hard it's being thrown, who's it being thrown to, who's getting open, how you're getting them open, running the plays as they're designed, just doing what you're supposed to do. If Will Levis can get that with his natural ability, as I said on December 4th, I think he's got the ability to be one of these superstar quarterbacks. That doesn't mean he's going to be, but he's got the ability. And so when I saw Jake Browning doing what he did and keeping the Bengals alive in the playoff hunt this year, even after Joe Burrow got hurt, I was incredibly impressed with Zach Taylor and his coaching staff. Remember, I made the Bengals my second team because I'd given up on the Titans season and I needed a new team to get behind, and I like Joe Burrow. So I got behind Cincinnati. And Ian, what happened as soon as I got behind Cincinnati?
Burrow got hurt.
And so I was like, well, there goes their season. But it didn't until the end when they got knocked out. I mean, they were competing with this Scarbini at quarterback. Did you know that Jake Browning was 4-3 as a starter this year, had the highest completion percentage in the NFL, had a quarterback rating of 98.4, and had 2 fourth-quarter comebacks and 2 game-winning drives? That's coaching. That's like one of the biggest compliments of Bill Belichick's tenure in New England is, well, he won 11 games with Matt Castle as his quarterback. And Jake Browning is not Matt Castle. So 4-3, that's the guru stuff we're talking about. Now, again, Zach Taylor was the head coach of that team, not Brian Callahan. So it's not like I'm saying, well, hey, Brian Callahan turned Jake Browning into a great quarterback, because that's not what I'm saying. But the fact that they took a guy who was kicking around practice squads and barely staying alive in the NFL, and they turned to him once the $50 million superstar top 2 quarterback in the NFL got hurt, and he gave them a pulse and looked like he had a clue, and they won some games with him, I thought was very impressive. And it should be noted for everybody out there that complains about how the Titans haven't scored 30 points in eons, Jake Browning in 7 starts scored 30 points twice. I mean, that is, 3 times. Now, the third time was against Cleveland, who was resting guys, but 3 30-point performances. And I know, hey, they got good receivers in Cincinnati. Well, we expect him to go get some good receivers here, too. We don't expect all the receivers to be bad. So that's what gets me. The Browning thing gets me excited more than the Burrow stuff. Again, I could coach Joe Burrow. Ed Orgeron coached Joe Burrow, which makes me think that I could coach Joe Burrow. Well, we're going to get up there to try to throw the ball to Nick Westbrook or Kinney, and, we get the ball and go from there and, give the ball to Derrick Henry. That's going to be what we should probably do. Derrick Henry is not with the team anymore, Coach. Oh, well, we'll go ahead and get the ball to the guy from Tulane and give him the ball. I could coach Joe Burrow, but the fact they did a good job with Jake Browning is important. Alex from Franklin says, I love the Callahan hire. I don't remember a Titans coaching search that made me this excited. Not even sexy hires like Wisenhunt or Vrabel made me this excited. I wouldn't say I'm that excited. I mean, every coach and GM thing, like, he's going to have a press conference this week, and you guys are going to come out of that press conference saying, that is our guy. And as long as it's not a disastrous press conference, I'll feel okay about it. But that's just, honeymoon, just typical whatever. But again, I do like the resume, and I feel good about that. Chris in Lewisburg says, would you still rather have Bobby Slowick? Yes, I would. But again, that doesn't matter because it ain't going to happen. So we could sit there. Chuck says Zach Taylor called all the plays. That's more NFL nepotism. See, here's where I disagree with that. Do you think John Gruden made this guy his offensive coordinator because it was a friend of Papa? Do you think Zach Taylor did that? Zach Taylor gets a head coaching job. Zach Taylor was riding the coattails of Mike Sherman, right? Mike Sherman had him at Texas A&M. Mike Sherman goes to be the offensive coordinator of the Dolphins. They draft Ryan Tannehill to be the quarterback, so he takes a bunch of the A&M guys and brings them over, like Zach Taylor. And so Zach Taylor is the quarterback's coach in Miami under Joe Philbin. Well, we know what happened to Joe Philbin in Miami. It was not pretty. Zach Taylor ends up with the Rams. Zach Taylor goes on to getting a head coaching job. Do you think Zach Taylor said, I need an offensive coordinator that I can rely on for this team? Or do you think Zach Taylor said, I'm going to do what's best because of that guy's daddy? And you know the answer to that. It's like Joe Buck. Joe Buck's dad was a great broadcaster. But do you think that ESPN paid Joe $1 gazillion to call Monday Night Football because of his dad? Probably not. And so, is Peyton Manning nepotism? Oh, they took him instead of Ryan Leaf. That's nepotism. No. So the idea that this was, they did it because of his dad. His dad was a coach for 2 years in the NFL as a head coach, and his dad sucked. He was really good the first year because he had Gruden's players and Jerry Rice and Tim Brown and Rich Gannon and all those guys, and then the next year they stunk. And he got fired. Again, it's not like it's Bill Belichick that we're talking about as his dad. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. So there are a lot of people in town that like this hire, including me. And there are a lot of people that don't like this hire. And there are a lot of people boo-hooing about the Titans and making this decision and who they fired in order to make this hire. We'll get to that next. Stillman and Company, 1025-1063 The Game. Hey, 1025-1063 The Game is officially inviting you to our first ever Super Saturday. Join us and come hungry on Saturday, February 10th at New Heights Brewing for all the soup you can handle from some of the finest restaurants in Middle Tennessee. Bring the family and enjoy delicious soup, live music, games for kids, and more. It's our first ever Super Saturday benefiting the Nashville Predators Foundation. More details are coming, including how to purchase tickets. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios. So I don't have a problem with the Titans hiring Brian Callahan. Again, he wasn't my first choice, but I like it. And as I said yesterday, I can live with Callahan. I can get excited about Callahan. Thomas Brown and the defensive guys, no. So when I saw that Brian Callahan was being hired last night, I thought, not a defensive guy. Ian, do you have a problem with the Titans hiring Brian Callahan as their head coach?
No, I don't think so.
The Boo-Hoo Vrabel crew does. Oh, my goodness. This morning, the Boo-Hoo Vrabel crew was out in full force as if Mike Vrabel had won a Super Bowl or been to a Super Bowl or had the Titans consistently contending for Super Bowls. This was Mike Florio this morning on NBC, on Peacock, where his show airs, talking about the mistake the Titans are making.
I'm going to give the guy a chance. I'm not saying I'm not giving the guy a chance. I'm just not inspired by this. I'm not excited by this because you had a coach who was doing the job well. He was one of the better coaches in the NFL. And I think the Titans, and I said this when they fired Mike Vrabel, owner Amy Adams Strunk allowed, I think, things irrelevant to Vrabel's coaching ability to cloud her judgment, and she decided she needed to move on, and I don't think she should have. Regardless, they should have found a way to make it work with Vrabel because you have a known commodity. It's kind of like what the Bears are going through with Justin Fields right now. You have a known commodity. You're going to roll the dice, and we see it all the time. It is a lot like drafting a quarterback, Shireen.
Yeah.
Making a coordinator a head coach. Completely different skill set. We don't know. We don't know. We'll find out. It may be good. It may be bad. He may have it. He may not. We don't know. But we know that Vrabel did. That's my big caveat going into this. And I know it's supposed to be a celebration when a team has a new coach and the glass is half full, and here we go. Maybe we have Vince Lombardi. Yeah, maybe you got Rich Kotite too. There's only one way to find out. It's their mess if it ends up being a mess, and they're the ones who are left to possibly regret moving on from Mike Vrabel and rolling the dice on a guy who could be, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take a shot at Rich Kotite earlier. Guy could be the next Brad Childress, possibly.
Okay. And Brad Childress wasn't great with the Vikings. Now, they did get to the NFC Championship game when he was the coach and Brett Favre threw the ball away. But guess what? Was Mike Tice really all that good before Brad Childress? So, again, they have Mike Vrabel. He was so good, and now they're taking a risk. Was Vrabel that good? And I know the answer is no, and so do most of you. But that's what I don't get, is the Mike Vrabel was doing a great job, and you let go of him to take a chance on a coordinator. Was he? They hadn't made the playoffs for 2 years. Okay? Vrabel hadn't won Super Bowls. Was he really doing that good of a job? Charlie Weiss, who is not biased, coming from the New England Patriots all those years. Charlie Weiss on SiriusXM NFL Radio today about the Titans hiring Brian Callahan.
Look, I'm happy for Coach Callahan. You know, he's a well-respected guy. You just wonder how that's an improvement over Mike Vrabel. That's my only question there. I mean, I just don't see how you improved yourself. But they decided to go in a different situation, different structure, and congratulations to him. And he's got a.
Now, Charlie is a little biased, not only because of Mike Vrabel, but also because the system the Titans run, the Erhardt-Perkins system, that's what Charlie runs. Like, Charlie was on those staffs with the Giants when they won the Super Bowl, and then obviously was in New England when they won the Super Bowls, and that's the system he runs. That Ray Perkins system. Well, I'm sorry, but it ain't 1980 anymore. So when you say to me, how do they improve? Well, they are going with the in vogue model of how the NFL operates, which is the guru coach for the quarterback. And 6 years ago, I would have agreed with you. Today, I don't. But again, everybody, it feels like, was treating Mike Vrabel in the media, was treating Mike Vrabel like he was Jimmy Johnson with the Cowboys. Like, how dare Jerry Jones fire Jimmy Johnson? Well, that makes sense because they were winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl with Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson built that team. Mike Vrabel got here, and the core of the team was intact. Sure, Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown had not shown up yet to that point, but for the most part, the core, the Derrick Henrys, the Taylor Lewans, the Kevin Byards, Jarrell Casey, Logan Ryan, all those guys were already here. They were already in the divisional round of the playoffs when Mike Vrabel showed up. Mike Vrabel got them to an AFC championship game. He got them to a wild card, and they busted out. And then he got them to the divisional round of the playoffs, and they busted out there too. Why? Because Mike Vrabel made a massive mistake when it came to hiring an offensive coordinator to replace Arthur Smith. That's why. That's why Ryan Tannehill had the terrible season that he had in 2021 when they switched the coordinators, and that's why he threw 3 interceptions in that Cincinnati game, and that's why you lost. And guess what Vrabel wouldn't do? He wouldn't change the coordinator. But see, I know that stuff, and you know that stuff because we follow this every day. They don't. They just get into their minds that Mike Vrabel's some great coach and that the Tennessee Titans are so stupid for firing Mike Vrabel and to hire this guy. That's how the NFL works. The Green Bay Packers fired Mike McCarthy. And I didn't hear anybody shedding tears about, oh, Mike McCarthy was such a good coach. Even though they won a Super Bowl with Mike McCarthy, even though they were almost always in the playoffs with Mike McCarthy, they fired Mike McCarthy. And they hired a guy who was running Mariota's offense and benched Derrick Henry. That's where the NFL is going. Okay? Like, that's where the NFL is headed. This idea that, like, the Titans made some fundamental mistake. The one thing I keep thinking about is the quarterback. And I keep thinking about how at the beginning of the year, it was obvious the Titans wanted to bring the quarterback along slowly, and I got it. But between his offensive line coach and the offensive line choices, like Andre Dillard and Aaron Brewer, and trust me, Rand's a part of that too. But between those, this quarterback was set up to fail. And then not only that, Mike Vrabel's such a good coach that he had Malik Willis ahead of Will Levis. And then he went into these games and he wanted to play both of them. And I should feel bad that the Titans fired that guy to hire somebody that knows something about quarterbacks. And it's like, I mean, they had a perfectly good thing going with Vrabel. They didn't win any games. But other than that, they had a perfectly good thing. And now they're rolling the dice. And this guy might be the next Bill Belichick. You're right. He might be. And deep down inside, I think we all know Vrabel probably never was going to be. But, they fired Mike Vrabel. I can't. Oh, no. Guys, Vrabel wasn't that good of a coach. I mean, he was a good coach. And I got carried away with the 91 guys too. But if you are one receiver away from being a competitor to an absolute toilet team, then it's really more about that one receiver than it is about the coach, right? And so that's where I think, again, everybody gets caught up in this. Vrabel did such a good job with bad rosters. Yeah, then they got rid of the great receiver, and it was, Vrabel's not supposed to win with this bad roster. Isn't that what makes him such a good coach that everybody's crying about right now? So no. Quit the crying out. This guy might be worse than Vrabel. He might be better than Vrabel, but I'm not going to miss Mike Vrabel in spite of all the crying. And when Charlie Weiss says, I can't see how that would be better, it's an offensive coach in an offensive league with a young quarterback. That's how. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, 615-737-1025. And I would say this about the Titans. The Titans deserve an apology, not from me, but from a lot of you. because they have been proven right about one thing already. And we'll do that next. Stillman and Company, 615-737-1025 here on our program. Again, if you want to weigh in, that's 615-737-1025. Basketball this Saturday. Vandy men's basketball taking on Tennessee. Tip-off 5 o'clock. It's at home. Pregame beginning at 4:30. And coverage is also available on the 94.9 The Fan app.
On the issue of possibly trading Mike Vrabel, I think one of the things I've learned in this cycle is if it's a relationship where there's already signs that it's falling apart, it's so much harder to accomplish that transaction because you do have to wait for other teams to get to the point where their searches have matured. And this year, the process has slowed down more than ever before because in-person interviews of coaching candidates under contract with other teams couldn't even start until yesterday. Yesterday was the first day that you could bring in Brian Callahan and meet with him face-to-face or anybody else who's under contract with another team. So it's going to take a while. It's going to set you back. Here we are 2 weeks into the offseason already. I think the only way a trade happens is when a phone call is made to a team where it's not kind of publicly known or at least sensed that there's an issue there that would cause the team to say, yeah, I'll take a first-round pick to get rid of this guy. It has to be the coach that we aren't thinking about, where the phone call is made and the next thing you know, oh, look at this. Team X is trading their coach, and it's not really a trade, but it is a trade to Team Y. So I think that's why it didn't work with Vrabel.
Florio again, and a lot of people owe the Titans an apology for this. I'm not one of them because I did not hammer the Titans for not trading Mike Vrabel. In fact, I did get on the Titans for not telling the truth by telling Diana, oh no, Vrabel's our coach, ready, steady, Vrabel. And then firing him 6 weeks later. But I did say, I said, if I own this football team, you would think that I love Mike Vrabel because I'd want to trade Mike Vrabel, but I'd be firing him at the end of the year. And that I would not wait. You know, I'd like to get something for Vrabel, but if there's not a market for Vrabel, I'm not going to wait on, you know, the progress of my football team just because everybody in the media tells me how good he is, and I turn around and fire him. And so because I knew how the rules worked, I knew that a trade for Vrabel would be incredibly difficult. So especially once the Patriots decided they were going the route of Gerard Mayo, I knew it wasn't likely that they would have been able to work a trade anyways. Well, here we are right now on January 23rd. The Titans have a new head coach. All these other teams don't, which means the Titans will be able to hire assistant coaches to fill their staffs while these other coaches aren't. And Mike Vrabel's still out there, and I don't know where he's going to go. The Titans would not have been able to get a first-round pick for Mike Vrabel. I know Diana said when they fired Vrabel, she said, there are teams that called me that said, should I fire my coach to hire Mike Vrabel? Well, apparently all those teams got together and said, no. I know Charles Robinson, and I like Charles. Charles Robinson said on the morning show that Mike Vrabel would start at least 2 first-round picks. But all these teams right now have job openings, and I don't see the Atlanta Falcons rushing to hire Mike Vrabel for no first-round picks, much less 2. So the Titans were right. And a lot of fans hammered the Titans that they didn't get anything for Vrabel. It wasn't so much the firing Vrabel that bothered some people. I mean, some people were bothered by the firing of Vrabel, but there were some people that were only bothered by the firing and the lack of getting anything in return. And Amy did her sit down with Mike Keith and said, I didn't think it was worth trying to wait. And a lot of people were hammering the Titans saying they were too lazy to try to trade Mike Vrabel. But that's not how this worked out. What happened was the Titans thought, hey, do you think we can get something for Vrabel? That's why they didn't fire him on Monday. They waited until Tuesday. They found out the answer was no because of how the rules work about interviewing external minority candidates and not being able to interview until after the divisional round of the playoffs and everything else. And they said it's not worth it. So they fired him. And so if you were somebody that was like, how dare the Titans not get anything in return for Mike Vrabel, you owe the Titans an apology. Because nobody is jumping for Mike Vrabel. He's interviewing for some of these jobs, meaning teams at best will consider him. But they're not going to consider him with a first-round pick. I mean, there's a big difference. And at this point, nobody has jumped after Vrabel. The Chargers haven't jumped after Vrabel. They're going to hire Jim Harbaugh. The Falcons haven't jumped after Vrabel. They've interviewed everybody, and they're going to hire Bill Belichick. Certainly the Commanders don't seem interested in Vrabel. I could not imagine Vrabel with the Panthers. And then there's the Seahawks, and it sounds like Dan Quinn's probably getting that job. So I know everybody's sitting there saying, when they fired Vrabel, you didn't get any compensation for Vrabel? Right, but that's not how this works. And if the Titans wanted to get on with their search, then they had to fire him. And they got on with their search because they didn't want to be left out in the cold. And I don't know if the Falcons would have hired Brian Callahan. I probably doubt it, but the Panthers might have. And so if you really like somebody, you got to go after him. You can't worry about what Vrabel might get on the trade market. If you're convinced you're done with Vrabel, move on. And even Florio's like, well, the rules are the way they are now. What it has to be in order for a coaching trade to work is not a guy that's on thin ice, but it's somebody who's on thick ice who doesn't want to be there anymore or whose team secretly doesn't really like him that much. So Mike Tomlin, you can't trade right now because who knows? Dan Campbell, you could trade him because you have the leverage, if you're the Lions, you like Dan Campbell. And it's okay if Dan Campbell's the coach. But if Dan Campbell doesn't want to be there anymore and nobody knows about it, you can trade him, make Ben Johnson your head coach or whatever, and then Dan Campbell can get a job somewhere else and that team can sell to its fans. And look, we just got the guy who was in the NFC Championship game. The problem is, this is like the Predators players, right? All those years, people have said they need to trade Johansson and Duchesne. And I'm like, nobody wants to trade for the guys that you don't want. The guys that they want to trade for are the guys that teams don't want to trade. Like, let's use quarterback, for instance. I don't want to trade for Geno Smith. I trade for Joe Burrow, but they don't want to trade Joe Burrow. Coach, the same way. The league said, we'd consider Vrabel for the job. Would you trade a first-round pick for? Hell no. And the Titans were right. And a lot of you that didn't understand how this worked, you guys were wrong. 615-737-1025. Phone lines driven by Wilson County Hyundai.com. One texter, Craig, says, why is everybody kissing Vrabel's ass? I thought if you fired Vrabel, he'll have a job tomorrow. Well, why hasn't he been hired yet? So Craig's right about this. Vrabel wasn't going to get hired the next day because the way the NFL works is it's not that simple, and there's negotiating, and there's other. So, again, but Jim Harbaugh is not going to have a hard time getting that Charger job. Jim Harbaugh, from the beginning, was going to get the Charger job, and Jim Harbaugh is going to get the Charger job. Even Bill. I think Bill's getting the Falcons job. Now, I think there's a little hookup, hang-up, whatever you want to call it, with Belichick and Rich McKay, which is some old football guy stuff that they got to get figured out. But Belichick's probably going to have a job. I would agree. Where's the spot for Vrabel? I mean, the Raiders are filled, the Titans are filled, the Patriots are filled, and it's not like Vrabel is going to come here. Harbaugh to the Chargers, so that job's out. Belichick to the Falcons, that job's out. Ben Johnson to the Commanders, that job's out. So now there's Seattle and Carolina. A lot of people think that Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator in Tampa, is going to get the Carolina job, and Dan Quinn's going to get the Seattle job. So what's that do for Vrabel? And if Vrabel doesn't get a job this hiring cycle, it'll be played off as, well, Vrabel doesn't want to get a job, and so he wants to take a year off and hit the slopes and everything. But that does eliminate he'll get a job tomorrow, because it's tomorrow and he won't have a job. 615-737-1025. We're back to your phone, 615-737-1025. Plus, all the people that are wondering if the Titans made the right call in switching from that coach to this coach, and all the people who are criticizing the Titans need to think of one thing that I have made up my mind on. And we'll get to that next. Stillman and Company, 615-737-1025 here on our program. That's 615-737-1025. Tune into 93.3 Classic Hits tomorrow night for MTSU men's basketball. The Blue Raiders are at home facing Jacksonville State. Pregame is at 6, tip-off is 6:30, and coverage is also available on the 93.3 Classic app and at 93.3classichits.com.
The truth is, I mean, the risk is the same from the standpoint you still have to go out and find a good head coach someplace.
Right, but if you're 3-20, it's probably easier to find a better coach than a 3-20 coach than it is to find a guy who got you to the playoffs for the first time in a decade.
Well, yeah, but no, you're missing my point. The point is you're going out trying to find somebody that's going to lead you to the Super Bowl. So whether you fire a guy that just won 10 games or a guy that won 0 games, you're still looking for that same guy.
The old man 6 years ago, Floyd Reese, saying, hold on. This idea that it's a big risk to fire Mike Mularkey and then go hire Mike Vrabel, that doesn't really matter. And I'm like, but Mike Mularkey was just in the division round of the playoffs, and it's easy when you fire some bum like Ken Wisenhunt. You don't have to get it right, but no, it's the same. The reality is you're looking for the coach that's going to get you to the Super Bowl. When it comes to Mike Vrabel and Brian Callahan, which, again, is the choice the Titans made, and Mike Florio and Charlie Weiss and everybody else, oh, they didn't get much better. I was thinking about it like this today, which is the only way the Titans get good. The Titans are essentially an expansion franchise right now. And I know that sounds incredibly disrespectful, but it's true. Because an expansion franchise starts off with a couple of teams that have older veterans that they don't want to pay or guys that are injured, and so you claim them off the list so that they don't have to pay the guy any money or anything like that, which is how the Texans ended up with Tony Baselli and Aaron Glenn on their initial Texans team. And then you get a young quarterback because you're going to be drafting number 1 or whatever it may be. And right now, that's all the Titans have. The Titans have a veteran receiver who everybody else didn't want in DeAndre Hopkins. They've got a defensive tackle, and they got a young quarterback. Outside of that, it's Jack Gibbons. They don't even have Aaron Brewer on their team anymore. So the only way the Titans get good anytime soon is by developing Will Levis and making him into a great quarterback, which is more than just, okay, we're going to coach Will the fundamentals. We're going to get Will to calm down a little bit so that he can hone in that rare ability that he has. You know, he's smart. He's going to learn the game with repetitions. It's more than that. It's getting him the right protection. It's getting him the right receivers. It's doing all of these things. Well, who do you trust has a better chance of unlocking that? Mike Vrabel and his 1990 Ray Perkins offense, or Brian Callahan, an offensive coach? And to me, the answer's simple. So, sure, is it a risk? Sure, but the risk is the same. The question is, who can develop the quarterback? And Callahan is a guy through their meetings and everything else who they think can develop the quarterback. And that's all that matters here. This is all about the quarterback because right now football is all about the quarterback. If you've got the great quarterback, you've got a shot. The problem is there's about 3 teams in the NFL that have great quarterbacks. Kansas City, Cincinnati, Baltimore. And outside of that, I'm having a hard time coming up. Houston? Like, seriously. Allen's good. Throw him in there. Buffalo. But outside of that, it's a whole lot of, we hope Trevor Lawrence is that dude. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. One texter says, Mike Vrabel had his ups and downs. His teams always had a chance to win. They won many games they had no business winning, but they were never a lock to win games either and lost many games that they should have won. He was never going to win the Titans a championship. Do you want to win championships or just have a chance to win every game you're in? Getting rid of him was the right move regardless of how Callahan works. I think the other thing, too, is that in order for Vrabel to truly work, he would have had to reinvent himself, which I have been saying he's going to have to change, and I'm just convinced Vrabel was never going to do that. And the coaching staff was a good example of that. Somebody texted in earlier today when we were talking about the boo-hoos for Vrabel, and he said, somebody's still mad about that special teams press conference. And I'm like, why would I be mad about that? I was right. Vrabel was vehemently defending the special teams coach, and then 8 months later had to get up there and face the music when he decided to fire the special teams coach after they lost the Colts game because they got 2 kicks blocked. Why would I be mad about that? But the reality is, is that Mike Vrabel will never look at himself and see those things ahead of time and think, you know what? Maybe I did hire a special teams coach that's not any good. I mean, that's something I just never see him doing. And I go back to this Ray Perkins offense. Like, that's great that Tom Brady won a bunch of Super Bowls with it, but outside of that, that's not where the league's headed. One texter says, Jared, when do you start worrying about the Titans not having made an official announcement? They're not still trying to fulfill the Rooney Rule, and they would be in huge trouble with both the league and the Ray Horton lawsuit if they started negotiating a contract before fulfilling the Rooney Rule. The news leaked out yesterday evening, and we're getting close to the end of today. What's going on? I mean, I think it's just dotting I's and crossing T's. I mean, at this point, the Titans would have shot that down if they were not done with Brian Callahan. Like, it's done. Don't worry about it. Don't be nervous in that regard. Texter says, is Mike Vrabel still due his salary? Yes, he is. I mean, again, I don't know the terms of a buyout on the contract. This isn't college football where all that stuff is made public unless you're Vanderbilt. And so I don't know the terms of it, but I think it's pretty standard in NFL coaching contracts that when the guy gets fired, you owe him the contract. So I'll say this, as much as the Titans get drugged through the mud for being considered a cheap organization, and that offensive line and the free agency that they had last year definitely reeked of it. But as much as they get drugged through the mud, they have no problem paying all these coaches and general managers to not work. Which is why I still have to give them a little bit of credit. One texter says, is it still possible for Vrabel to get the job as Ohio State's head coach? I mean, anything is possible. But I think Ohio State is going forward with Ryan Day. Plus, not that I keep up daily with college football recruiting, especially because transfer recruiting is now kind of the new recruiting, and then regular recruiting, it's like, who knows? I just watch the games on Saturdays during the fall and then decide who's good. But apparently Ohio State is raking in all these kids, including some young hotshot guru quarterback prospect that I'd never heard of before from Alabama. And I guess Alabama's kind of having like a free-for-all with all these guys leaving the team after Saban left. But to answer your question, the answer is no. I do not think Vrabel is going to be the Ohio State head coach right now. Texter says, Dear Diana Rossini, where are all the teams that were firing their current head coach to go get Vrabel? You know, I got to be honest with you, Ian. The Vrabel fear seems very odd to me, right? That as much as the media told us, Diana especially, and we know that Diana, is pumping Vrabel's tires, but it is, and I mean that in terms of putting things out in the media, but it is wild to me that it's almost like these teams don't even want Vrabel. Yeah, we'll interview him, I guess.
Maybe the situation was like, hey, why would the Titans fire Vrabel? Was there something really there? More so than the Titans were a bunch of idiots.
That may be true.
I don't know. Maybe. If they're like, hey, everybody knows Vrabel's such a good coach. They think Vrabel's such a good coach. They just did all this new contract, extension. Why all of a sudden did they switch gears here so quickly? Maybe something's funky.
There was a rumor that when Gruden called a Colts Monday Night Football game, John Gruden did, that the Colts were going to be interested in hiring John Gruden. And this was during the Jared and the GM show, and I was like, oh, no! And Floyd said to me, he goes, nah, I ain't worried about that. I said, you don't think they'll hire him? He goes, oh, I have no idea about that. But as far as like John Gruden coaching and that being a problem for the Titans for years to come, he goes, I'm not worried about that. I said, really? He goes, yeah. Okay. That's kind of how I feel about Vrabel. TV loves him, but as far as like, am I worried to put my team up against Mike Vrabel in a playoff game? Probably not. 615-737-1025. We're back to your phones next. 615-737-1025. Plus, the play calling and the fact that Brian Callahan hasn't done it before, but he's going to do it now. Should we be worried? We'll do that next. Stillman and Company, 1025, 1063 The Game.
He coordinates everything having to do with it. He establishes the whole structure of our offense. On game day, he and I are in constant communication. That is calling plays. That is establishing an offense. He has helped develop every position we have. He's invaluable. There's really not enough things I can say about him that if someone just followed us for a week and saw it, it would be, oh, no wonder everyone's so high on Brian.
There you go. That was Zach Taylor talking about Brian Callahan. And so there's this big concern. Jared, what do you think about the fact that he doesn't call the plays? And let me say this. It's not nothing, because it is an art form in terms of whether or not you can actually call the plays. That you've got the big play sheet in front of you and that you know the right time to just say, okay, King X, YZ post, double slant, eagle eye, halfback check, 22 dash. Like, there is something about that does, like, some dudes got it, some dudes don't. And if Brian Callahan doesn't have it, then we got some problems. But here's why I guess it's not that big of a deal to me. Because everybody's got to start somewhere at some point. And this is the way it works with the McVay-Shanahan tree, which is Mike McDaniel doesn't call plays. Then he goes to Miami, and it's time for him to start calling the plays. Kevin O'Connell doesn't call the plays. Then he goes to be head coach. It's time now for him to start calling the plays. And I don't see Brian Callahan as any different from any of those guys. So it's not nothing. And if he and Bobby Slowick were exactly even, and I guess it seems like they're not, but if they were exactly even, then I would give the nod to Slowick because I know Slowick can call plays. But with Callahan, it's like, it's time for him to do that anyways. Arthur Smith had never called plays before. And then they went and hung a 40-piece on Cleveland in his first game. And there's going to be some moments where I'm sure there'll be some calls that he wishes he had back. But I don't think that it's as monumental of a, he's never called plays and you're making him the head coach. I'm not sure that that's as big of a deal as everybody makes it out to be. At least not to me. Like, if you give me the idea that you can call plays, that you're smart enough to know what to do, and you check all the other boxes, that's okay. It's kind of like, I think about it like this. Ian, you're the assistant program director, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so in theory, knock on wood, let's hope this never happens, but if Chase gets hit by a bus, you become program director, right?
Something like that.
Okay, at least on an interim basis or whatever have you.
Help out, yes.
So you don't pick the topics for this show, right? I do.
Usually.
So basically, the way that we operate, I call the plays.
Sure, yeah.
Do you think that if you were put into a role where all of a sudden you're overseeing all the shows and you're trying to help them say, okay, let's talk about what topics to pick here, do you feel comfortable that you could do that?
A little.
I feel comfortable that you could do that. And how much throughout the course of a show and throughout the course of a day do we talk about this stuff?
Fair amount.
How many times am I like, should we start on this or should we start on that?
Here and there, yeah.
I mean, that's how I view this. And I have no doubt that Ian could absolutely pick the topics for a show in Nashville every day. Now, I'll tell you what, I don't think Floyd could have done that. But that's because he's like, it's like we're the offensive coaches and he's a defensive coach. He's the guru. He's the expert. He's the analyst. But again, that's how I view this. So it's not nothing that he didn't call the plays. And again, that there's an art form to it and things like that. But I'm more worried about how he handles the day-to-day interaction with Rand as head coach than I am how he calls the plays on a Sunday. And then the best part is, if he's a great play caller, which we don't know, he might not be. If he ends up being a great play caller, they're worried that he's going to get Will Levis killed after all the injuries that Joe Burrow has had. Just hoping he's not the next Mike Martz, known for a great offensive scheme that also happens to be getting his quarterbacks hurt regularly. Did Mike Martz get his quarterbacks hurt often? I mean, I guess Kurt Warner got hurt that first year and Trent Green came in and then Warner went back.
Didn't he go to Detroit after that?
Martz? Either that or Chicago or, I can't even remember Mike Martz.
I don't know.
Mike Martz,
It did not go well. I do remember that.
Yeah, it was a disaster with Mike Martz as the coach. There's no doubt about that. But I can't even – to answer your question about am I worried about Levis getting killed, yes, because I'm always worried about the quarterback getting hurt. But I'm not – I'm more worried about Levis being injury prone than I am about the Titans not prioritizing protecting Levis in the offseason. I am worried that Levis is injury prone. And the one that really sticks out to me is the injury in training camp, because that happened in a non-contact setting. And it did set him back. It did hurt I thought he should have been the opening day backup. We were in Minnesota, and it was me and TD and Paul and Nick Suss and Sam Phelan at A to Z, and there was probably about 8 or 9 of us that were out there in Minnesota covering training camp practice. And I asked everybody, Gentry, I asked everybody. I went up to everybody and I was like, hey, Levis or Willis? And every single person except for me said Willis at that point in time. I said it was about even, but I had a slight nudge to Levis. And Levis got hurt there, and so the Titans went into the year with Levis as the third-string quarterback. And quite frankly, Levis, if he hadn't gotten hurt, probably would have played better in that Minnesota preseason game, and he probably would have been the backup quarterback going into the season. And so that non-contact injury made me nervous, because I guess he didn't get hurt that first year at Kentucky, but he got hurt the second year at Kentucky. He got hurt in training camp non-contact, and he got hurt this year. And so I am worried that he's injury prone. If he's not injury prone, freaking great. But I'm more worried about that than I am about them getting him killed. With Burrow, one, they got him killed. They got him killed in Cincinnati. But the second thing with Burrow is he hangs on to the ball until the last possible second, because it's like he doesn't care about getting hit, and he pops right back up. And I think that might just be a Burrow thing, which is part of what makes Burrow so great. Texter says Martz got Jay Cutler killed. I guess. One texter said, with the coaching hire, is T. Higgins a possibility? So this morning, Robbie and Joe had the Bengals writer from The Athletic on their program, and they brought up T. Higgins. I've said the whole time, I think T. Higgins is getting franchised. And he said Higgins is getting franchised. Now, the difference is, I don't think Higgins is getting franchised and staying on the team. I think Higgins is getting franchised and then being traded to another team. So I think they're going to put the tag on Higgins, and then they're going to trade him before the draft, and I bet they hope to get a first-round pick out of it. And they might. And then the acquiring team that trades a first-round pick has to then give him a $120 million contract. Now, if I'm going to do all those things, I don't want T. Higgins. I want Justin Jefferson if I'm going to do that. I'd rather pay more money and give up a better draft choice and get Justin Jefferson, who I think is a better player than T. Higgins. But I think if you're the Titans and you do that, it's a lot more complicated than just, Brian Callahan, is he going to bring T. Higgins with it? It's not like, Lincoln Riley leaves Oklahoma and Caleb Williams goes with him to USC. The kind of players that you get that come with you in the NFL are Jimmy Garoppolo as a free agent going with Josh McDaniels. It's Azeez Al-Shaair, who, as we all learned this weekend, rather still be in San Francisco than probably be on the Titans. That's what you end up getting out of this. So, in theory, I'm not going to completely poo-poo the idea of Higgins coming here. I'm just going to tell all of you that it will require some form of your first-round draft choice, and then you have to give him $120 million. And I would say, why don't you see if you can get that with either your first or second-round draft choice? Now, what the Titans could do is the Titans could trade out of 7, because one of these should be elite talents, whether it's Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Joe Alt, whatever, should still be on the board at 7. Especially if quarterbacks go high, trade out of that spot, pick up more picks, and then use the more picks to acquire a Higgins. But again, that's also complicated. And you wouldn't know about any of that until the draft because teams that would trade with you to get to 7 probably won't trade with you before the draft unless there are 7 players that they like. Or a team looking for a quarterback that's trying to trade to 7 that can then try to trade to 3. But again, it's really complicated. It's not as simple as, with Brian Callahan coming in, are we getting T. Higgins? Again, long answer, we can talk about it. Short answer, no. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, 615-737-1025. Coming up next, Amy said she would tell us who's going to have full control of the 53-man roster. So who should it be? Now that we know who it's going to be as the coach, who should have full control? We'll do that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios. Brian Callahan is going to be the next Titans head coach. So last year, When we went through this with the hiring of Rand Carthon, there was all this talk of who's going to have final say on the roster? Who's going to have final say? And I remember listening to the midday show, and Caroline was convinced that it was like some kind of super secret. And I'm like, I actually think the Titans are telling us the truth when they say that nobody has final say, when they say we'll figure it out and go from there and that'll be what we do. And everyone's like, that doesn't make any sense. I know, but that's what I think they're doing. And it's like, wait a minute, yeah. And so then throughout the course of the year, everybody believed, and for about a month, I fell into this too, because Paul said it, and he said it convincingly, and I took the bait on. Like, I am embarrassed in myself for having thought that I was right about this collaboration. No one really has final say. We're going to work it out, we promise. And then going to, nope, Vrabel's in charge because Paul said so. And I'm very upset with myself that I fell into that. But at least I can admit to it. But for about a month, I thought Vrabel was in charge. But then for the most part, it was pretty obvious to me that it was kind of a, oh, yeah, we're going to try to really treat this like a marriage. And we both have equal say, which in a football team's never going to work. And even the Titans knew long term that wasn't going to work. Then Vrabel gets fired, and it comes out that Vrabel didn't want this, Vrabel didn't want that, Vrabel didn't want this, Vrabel didn't want that. Vrabel had a little veto power, but he didn't have that. And it was like, okay. This became as stupid as Mike Vrabel not telling us who was calling the plays on defense in 2020. And so Amy Adams Strunk sat down with Mike Keith when they fired Mike Vrabel and told us that when they hired the coach, which they now have done, she was going to tell us who was in charge of the 53-man roster.
All right, so I'm going to put two questions together. Will the new head coach report to Rand Carthon or to you? And who will have control of the 53-man roster?
Today is about the coaching staff. I'm not quite ready to answer that question. I still have some things to work through, but I will answer both those questions at the end of the process.
So when it's done, you'll make this clear publicly who the head coach reports to and who has control of the roster.
Absolutely, yes.
I love Mike Keith. He's not asking that question if it hasn't been greenlit for him to ask. And so she's going to tell us. Now, let me say this. I think she's going to give full control to Rand Carthon. I would give full control to Brian Callahan. And you're going to say, wait a minute, what? Traditionally, I do believe in the GM being in charge of the roster and the GM being in charge of the coach. And in this case, with a first-year coach, I would really lean on the GM being in charge of the coach and reporting directly to the owner. But here's why I disagree. It's the two people that we have that we're discussing that are involved. I said at the end of the year, I would have fired both of them and started from scratch and gone GM first. That's not what they decided to do. They wanted Rand to be a part of this. Well, in Cincinnati, the coach does a lot of personnel. Duke Tobin runs their personnel department, and I think a lot of the decisions are made by him with the Brown family. And, those are usually tried to be made on the cheap, though Joe Burrow has made them spend a little bit of money here or there. But I really think in Cincinnati, the way it's been told to me was that Marvin Lewis, when he was in Cincinnati, he did a lot of that. That it was like, okay, here's the deal. Working for the Brown family, what you're going to get is you're going to get a lot of autonomy. You're not going to get the biggest checks, so you're probably not going to win the Super Bowl on a consistent basis. And you're going to have to do double the work because you're going to have to work in scouting as soon as the season's over. But you can be Marvin Lewis and go 9-7 every year and keep your job. And that's the way it worked. So that's what Brian Callahan's experienced. And I even asked Joe today, I said, who runs the Bengals? Like, who has final say with the Bengals? And Joe said, the guy that I talked to at the Athletics seemed to think the GM might. And I'm like, they don't have a GM. So, I mean, if you're talking about Duke Tobin, he's like the director of pro personnel or something like that. And that is traditionally a title that is below GM. So in Cincinnati, the coach is very involved. So he's got experience with that. The second thing is Rand, right? It's not that I don't trust Rand to make big decisions on the roster. which I don't. But it's not that. It's more so that Rand comes from San Francisco. And in San Francisco, Kyle Shanahan has the final say on the 53-man roster. Where Rand comes from, the coach has a humongous responsibility. Where Callahan comes from, the coach has a humongous responsibility. And quite frankly, I think Rand's personality, just from what I've gathered, is that he is a very agreeable person. You know, some people are kind of the mindset that we didn't really get to see the true Rand Carthon this year because Rand Carthon spent so much time trying to make this relationship work with Mike Vrabel. I can't tell you if that's true or not because I'm not inside that building. But that is kind of the narrative that's come from this. But a lot of that, I think, is because Rand is a naturally agreeable person. So if Rand comes from a setup where John Lynch kind of oversees the personnel department and how scouting is run and how analytics are used to decide which players and how they mesh the analytics with the tape, but then they take it to Kyle Shanahan, wouldn't it be better for Rand to run an operation here where, again, he oversees the analytics, he oversees the scouts, he oversees the pro personnel guys, so that when Sarah Bailey in analytics goes to Anthony Robinson as an assistant GM and they decide, hey, this is the best tackle that we should take in the third round, that then Rand and Kyle and Brian Callahan can say, okay, Brian, what do you think? And then Brian gives it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. In this individual situation, given the backgrounds of the two guys, that's the route I would go. But I don't like the idea of a rookie coach being put in charge of personnel and feeling 100% comfortable about it. The second thing that gives me a little reservation about putting the coach in charge, which we see less and less of in the NFL, but the second thing that I have a little reservation on is that sometimes I do think it's good to have the suit be somebody who's kind of away from the locker room. You know, Floyd he loved those players, but he was careful about the relationships that he would have because he ultimately knew that he was the guy who was firing these players or signing them to contracts or asking them for pay cuts or whatever. He couldn't be somebody who could have the players have to be mad at somebody. The players have to point a finger somewhere. And it's a lot easier when they can just point it upstairs than it is when they point it at the guy who's asking me to go out there on Sunday and do what he's telling me is in the best interest of the team. But again, I think Brian Callahan's background in Cincinnati and Rand Carthon's background in San Francisco make it more likely that they could pull off the Shanahan-Lynch relationship here, which is quite frankly what they want. So whenever this press conference is, which I think it's going to be Thursday, I haven't seen, I guess the Titans haven't named anybody their coach yet, so they can't announce a press conference, but I'm going to guess it's Thursday or Friday. And on Thursday or Friday, I expect Amy, when she gets up there and gives her pre-written remarks before she sits down and lets Rand talk and then lets Brian Callahan talk, I fully expect her to say Rand Carthon's going to be the one who is in charge of the 53-man roster, and I get it, but I'd have it go the other way. I'd have Brian Callahan in charge of it. And then the other thing is I'd have Brian Callahan be accountable for it, right? All these coaches that have final say, they don't get asked every time they get to the podium, why did you draft the left tackle? Bill Belichick didn't get asked that every day. Pete Carroll didn't get asked that every day. Those guys didn't get asked it every day. So the idea that Brian Callahan, we can't give it to him because then the media will ask questions all the time, why you traded this guy, why you did. You're not going to get asked that every day. You'll get asked it some, but you won't get asked it every day. And I think Brian Callahan has the experience that he should be able to handle that. And so if I'm calling the shots, The final say of the 53-man roster goes to Brian Callahan. But that doesn't mean that Rand works for Brian Callahan. Does that make any sense? Like, they work together, but when push comes to shove and we're on that clock and the running back is there and the receiver is there and the guard is there and the safety is there and the board says the safety is technically better than the running back and the analytics person is saying that the tackle is better than the safety and there's some personality concerns with the other guy and we've got 10 minutes to get this pick in. Brian, who are we taking? That's what I would do. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. If you got a thought on that, we'll get to it at 615-737-1025 here on Stillman and Company. And then the Derrick Henry question. And Chase did a very good job. They had an interview today with Gary Kubiak, who gave Brian Callahan his first job in the NFL. And again, we talk about the Shanahan tree, but the real Shanahan tree is Mike Shanahan. And Gary Kubiak was his backup quarterback in Denver, and then later his offensive coordinator at the end there with Elway and those guys. Gary Kubiak hired Brian Callahan. And Chase asked Gary Kubiak about Derrick Henry in this offense. So where would Derrick Henry fit? What Kubiak says. And the Derrick Henry conundrum. We'll get to that next. Stillman and Company, 615-737-1025, 1025-1063 The Game.
Could you see a player like Derrick Henry working in this, or do you think that getting more of a speedy, pass catching back is what they're going to need to do?
Well, I think the great thing about the system and the belief in what you're doing is, you got to be able to fit all kind of players into what you do. There's no perfect roster. I mean, it doesn't exist in the NFL. There's a lot of changeover. So when your group is set, you got to go find what you do best and make sure you're putting people in position that can make plays and getting them touches. And that's the biggest part of coaching nowadays. How quick can you get to that point? He's starting from scratch with a new team, new group. Learning your team, how you're going to go about it, what you're going to do best. Those are all things you got to go figure out real quickly.
There you go. That was Gary Kubiak on with Chase and Big Joe today. Again, go listen to that interview. Very insightful. But basically the question was, does Derrick Henry fit into this offense that, of course, Kubiak has run very well? And Gary's like, well, the thing about this offense is you can fit all kinds of players in it. And he's not wrong. Todd Gurley, Terrell Davis have all had success in this. Christian McCaffrey now out in San Francisco. He's a very different back than Todd Gurley was. And then Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's also had success in this offense. He did at the end of Matt LaFleur's run here. And, of course, he did under Arthur Smith. Then they went back to that Ray Perkins offense with Tim Kelly last year. Here's the Derrick Henry thing. When you're a star player, the big decisions, we talk about who's got final say between Amy and Rand and Brian Callahan now and, they want a collaboration and this is right. But when it comes to the star players, just like the quarterback, the owner is involved. Now, the best operations are run with a owner looks at Andy Reid and says, what do you think? Well, I think we should re-sign him. Okay. What do you think? Well, I don't think. Okay. But again, the big decisions, the owner is involved no matter what. And this is a big one. Like Stan Kroenke was involved when it came to trading Jared Goff and the picks for Matthew Stafford. If I own the Titans and I want Derrick Henry back on this team, but it'd have to be up to Brian Callahan. And I would tell Brian Callahan, he's a great leader. He is the most popular player this organization maybe has ever had. He's clearly the most popular player now. He carries a lot of respect in this facility. A belief in you from him is a big deal for everybody else. But do you want him? How do you envision using him? Do you want to pay him? How much do you want to pay him? How do you want to handle this? And then I would tell Brian Callahan that if he does want to proceed with bringing back Derrick Henry and having a combo 1-2 punch of Henry and Spears, then I would say, okay, now you're the one that's going to have to kind of go over this with Henry about what his role is going to be and how much you expect him to help the team. If you want him to be the Jerome Bettis of this, where they slowly transition away, but he's still the grandfather in the room that carries this team when it matters the most, you've got to work that out with him. And if he said, no, I want to go in a different direction, as much as I would hate watching Derrick Henry on another team next year, or even worse, hate watching Derrick Henry sit out there in free agency and sign for $3 million or whatever the market may be, I have to show confidence in my new coach to do things the way that he wants to do them. But again, if you wonder, can Henry fit? Yeah, he can, because Gary Kubiak just told you he could. Phone lines driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. DeJuan has been waiting patiently on Rand Carthon. Thank you for calling. Thank you for waiting. Go ahead, DeJuan.
What's up, man? I wanted to give you some insight on Rand. When you say he's agreeable, see, I'm a black man that works in corporate America, right? So, corporate America as an accountant, a senior level managerial accountant. So anytime I'm going for a job, I'm not going to always be my true self. I'm going to be agreeable just because that's a different dynamic. It's majority white when it comes into that accounting space. And when I see Rand, I see that same pathway. It's like getting his foot in the door. I would say around year 2, you're going to see his real personality. and I speak on behalf of most blacks. That's how we operate in the corporate space. So I would say, now I'm not saying that I agree with the picks that he did in this past draft, but the presentation of him being too nice, too agreeable, too cool, that's all going to change. Now that the clock is ticking on him, and you'll see that.
Well, I absolutely think that something's going to change because the relationship with him and Callahan is probably not as shotgun forced as the relationship between him and Vrabel. I think we can agree on that, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that'll play a role into it. Model. And again, on the agreeable front, what I have been led to believe, Buck reported this at A to Z Sports, what I have been led to believe is that, well, I shouldn't say what I've led to be believed. What I have heard and what has been reported is that Rand placated to Vrabel because he wanted to make the relationship with Vrabel work. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, Joe told me, Dennis Kelly told Chase and Joe that he was going to come back to the Titans and Rand shut it down. So again, with all this stuff, I don't know who to believe. But the 49ers are run by Kyle Shanahan. Rand told a story. I asked him at his opening press conference if there was a draft situation that he can remember where they picked a guy and that he was very proud of. And he brought up Elijah Mitchell and talked about how the analytics guy walked into his office and said, this is, the numbers say, the best outside zone runner according to the analytics in the draft. But I need you, football guy Rand Carthon, to watch the tape so that we can go to Kyle Shanahan and not just say, here's what the EPA says, but this is what this says plus what Rand says about the tape. So Rand watched the tape, said, yeah, he's good. Went to Kyle Shanahan with it. Why'd they have to go to Kyle Shanahan? Because Kyle Shanahan's in charge. And so that's how the 49ers are run. John Lynch oversees that whole operation and then reports to Kyle Shanahan. And because that's what Rand comes from, that's what I think Rand should do here. And because Brian Callahan comes from the Bengals, where the coaches are more involved in personnel than they are in other places, I'm okay with a rookie coach being in charge of the personnel, especially somebody that's got a system, where he's going to use them, how he's going to use them, and that's why I would feel that way. I think it's going to go the other way. And I do think, I agree with you, I think we're going to see Rand hopefully learn from some of the rookie mistakes, but also kind of be more accountable going forward because he doesn't have to deal with not wanting to rock the Vrabel boat. But again, as far as that's just the San Francisco model, and I'm fine with that. Trevor Matich joins us next on the program. What does Trevor think? And I told Trevor, I said, there's one thing in particular I want you to look at when we bring you on today, which was how the Bengals have operated on the offensive line on the fly. But what does Trevor think of the hiring of Brian Callahan? What does it mean for Will Levis? And then what did he see about that Bengals offensive line? We'll do that next. Twice Daily wants to send you to Italy. That's right. So what you're going to do is go to twicedaily.com/sweepstakes. You'll learn more info, however it is, but buy any made-to-order Italian sub and use your rewards app to get entered. Every sub is a chance to win, and mobile-ordered Italian subs count 2 times the entry. Twice Daily's made-to-order offerings allow you to get exactly what you want when you want it. I can just go right down the street to my Twice Daily, punch it into the computer, use it on the app, bang, 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 and it's ready to go. And that's one of the many reasons why I love Twice Daily, and I go to Twice Daily all the time. Download the Twice Daily app and join their loyalty program to unlock special discount savings and so much more. It pays to be a member with Twice Daily, where you'll earn points and save money with every visit. Get what you crave at Twice Daily, made to order sandwiches, bakery, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you name it, fresh items made to go. If you're looking for convenience, Twice Daily has you covered. Twice Daily, fresh all day. Stillman and Company, it is Tuesday. It is 4:30. It is Trevor Matich presented by Houston Clinic Orthopedics. When experience matters, the Titans reportedly have hired Brian Callahan from the Bengals as their next head coach. Trevor Matich joins us now. Trevor, your initial reaction when you found out the Titans were going this path with the offensive coordinator of the Bengals?
Initial reaction was, this is exciting. It feels really exciting, doesn't it? It feels like we kind of stepped out of the old pickup truck driving along the farm and stepped into a Corvette whipping down the freeway. Now, whether it happens that way, we'll see. But my first thought was, wow, this feels more exciting than I expected it to. And the second thought was, and what good timing to bring in an offensive coach with a young quarterback to be able to sell season tickets and PSLs when they get that new stadium built. So those two things, the excitement and the big picture moving forward to be able to sell fans on reasons they should pay thousands of dollars to come see this team, I think all combined into one here.
Okay, let's go to Levis on this because, you know, when I watch these games on Sunday or Saturday last weekend, Trevor, I see a very big difference between Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and, quite frankly, the rest of the NFL. And then the game in particular that I kind of circle is the Green Bay-San Francisco game because those are two quarterbacks that are on their way, especially Jordan Love and the progress that he's made over the last couple of years when he looked allergic to football in 2021 when he got put in there in that one game for Aaron Rodgers. And then at the end of the game against the 49ers where he looked like Brett Favre, both good and bad, by throwing that interception. In order for this to all work, Levis has to pop. One, does he have the talent to be able to do that? And two, what does Brian Callahan have to do to unlock that in Levis so that the Titans can have success?
The short answer is I'm not sure yet. I'm very encouraged by how he performed under tremendous pressure with a terrible offensive line and a receiving core that was not just subpar. It was frankly abysmal in terms of its overall performance as a group. And I'm encouraged by what he did. I think that he'll be able to continue to grow because of the things that he showed. He showed not just arm strength, he showed more arm nuance in his ability to vary his trajectory. He showed the ability to read a defense under pressure because he was under pressure most of the time. He showed the ability to get hit a lot early and pop back up and focus on the next play. And emotionally, he showed the ability to be completely fired up or completely hammered in terms of getting hit. And he would get up and control those emotions and focus on the next play. Those things tell me that he'll continue to grow. And so I'm very encouraged by that. You talk about Jordan Love of the Packers. Early on, he didn't show really any of those things with the Packers. It took him a few years as a backup to be able to develop into where he is now. So I would say that Will Levis is ahead of Jordan Love in the trajectory of their careers. Now, so what needs to happen? Well, they need to surround him with much better players. They need to give him better time. And they need to make sure that he's got an offense that caters to what he does best. Too often you'll have offensive coordinators or offensive-minded head coaches come in and say, this is what we do, and you, the quarterback that I inherited, are going to do it. Well, that makes no sense at all. They need to make sure to identify what he does best, ask him questions about plays that are in and plays that aren't, so that they can find out what he likes the most, and then find the plays that they need him to execute, whether he likes it or not, and coach him up on those, and make this Will Levis's offense instead of the coach's offense.
What do you make of what Brian Callahan's done in the past with that Bengals offense? And what really impressed me, Trevor, was how Jake Browning stepped in for Joe Burrow this year. And he wasn't Joe Burrow, but they did put up 30 points 3 times. He was 4-3 as a starter. I mean, I was impressed with a guy who had been kicking around practice squads going in there and the Bengals still competing. Now, he wasn't the head coach. Zach Taylor was. But what do you make of that and how that could translate to the Titans?
Well, Jared, I think that kind of shows how they play to the strength of the quarterback that they have. With Joe Burrow, they went to a lot of empty backfield. They knew the offensive line wasn't great, and it's gotten a lot better. but it still isn't great. And they allowed Burrow to read the defense and get the ball out quickly and accurately because that's what Burrow does best. With Browning, they put him under center more often. They would run the ball more with traditional runs, one back, two backs, et cetera, to take the pressure off of Browning and put it onto the offensive line and the running backs. And they allowed him to move around with his legs more. So, I'm very impressed with how Browning did, but you've got to give a lot of credit to the Bengals coaching staff to have found out what he can do and start there rather than say, okay, here's Joe Burrow's offense, Jake Browning, go in there, Jake Browning, and run Joe Burrow's offense. They didn't do that. That's one of the reasons that he was able to be successful. What was he, like 5-2 or something like that over the games that he started?
4-3,
and
close
so
enough.
He did. Yeah, okay. He was really good. So that is good. Now, what would happen next year if he has to play is a different question because now defenses have more tape on Browning, but that doesn't matter for what we're talking about now. So I'm very impressed with that. And what that tells me about Brian Callahan is that he comes from a school that says, who are my players? How can I help them excel? Instead of, I am a brilliant guru coach and my players are going to do what I tell them.
Mm-hmm. What did you make, Trevor, of the Brian Callahan coming off of this Shanahan-McVay tree, which, there's the branch to Zach Taylor and now him. But what do you make of the fact that he hasn't called plays? Because a guy like Bobby Slowick of the Texans was calling plays this year. And as Troy Aikman said last week, there is an art to calling plays. And even though Zach Taylor was very, complimentary of the job that Brian Callahan did and his involvement in how they went over those play calls, he didn't call the plays for the Bengals. Is that a big deal to you?
I don't think it's a big deal necessarily. And I don't think it's a big deal if he does call plays for the Titans, whether he calls the plays or he has an offensive coordinator calling the plays. I don't think it really matters all that much. I mean, the value for having a young, innovative, offensive-minded coach like Callahan is not necessarily that he's a genius play caller, although he may turn out to be that. It's that as the team has success and his offensive coordinators get hired away to be head coaches in other places over the years, the offense, in terms of what the quarterback needs to know, the nuances of that offense, the terminology of that offense will always remain pretty much the same because you've got Callahan as the head coach and the new offensive coordinator that comes in will put his own stamp on things, but he will have to learn what's already in place here because that's what they run here. And that's the value. So the fact that he hasn't called plays, maybe he can, maybe he can't, but I don't think who calls plays is the key. The key is putting the quarterback in the best position. And when you look at, schemes for offense, you need things that the Titans showed a little bit of this year, but not as much and not early enough in the season. And that is a tree of plays off of basic plays and then get those into the game. It's like you have a run to right tackle, just a zone run right tackle, right? And you take the best play callers in the game will then have another play that starts the first two steps off right tackle, but it's designed to then bounce outside, or same first two steps designed to bounce inside, or play action off of that where the quarterback's in the pocket, or play action where the quarterback bootlegs out wide left, or any one of four different screens off of the same exact action. That puts a ton of stress on the defense and makes it very easy for the offensive line and everybody else on the team because they're all basically doing just about the same thing except for one or two players. And so these kinds of things help quarterbacks. And so who's calling those plays to me is less interesting than whether or not they have trees off of basic plays that they can do counter off of counter off of a counter to keep the defense off balance without overly burdening their team with too much knowledge to have to process.
Let's say he does call the plays because I think it's reported that he's going to. And I want him to call plays because I saw what happened to the Eagles when Shane Steichen left, even though they're running that same offense, and it just didn't look like they were able to pick up where they left off. But let's say Callahan is calling the plays. How important is the coaching staff surrounding Will Levis? We know the players surrounding Will Levis are incredibly important, but how important is the coaching infrastructure around Levis?
Well, it's critical because Levis, as much as he should think that he's got it going on, he needs to have that brash confidence. He also needs a professional humility. The greatest quarterbacks in the league that I've seen, at least most of them, have a professional humility. They listen to their coaches. They consider that maybe there's something that they can do better, that there's something that they can adjust. And Levis needs to make sure he keeps that. And the coaches need to encourage that without putting him down, without putting into his mind that he's not as good as he thinks he is. That's not the way to do it. You've got to say you're every bit as good as you think you are, and here's how to be even better. Here's how to avoid mistakes that'll take you down, and replace them with good things. Like, a lot of times, a lot of quarterbacks don't do this, but the best quarterbacks will learn what they need to do from a game planning standpoint in a proactive way on offense. And then on every play, they'll learn what they need to do if things break down. So if I drop back to pass with this particular pass pattern and this particular protection, if I get pressure from the right, what am I going to do? If I get pressure up the middle, what am I going to do? If I get pressure on the left, where do I go? How do I scramble? What do I do? What are my answers when things go bad and the defense is winning? And sometimes the answer to that is just throw it away. These are all things that quarterbacks need to learn, and the teaching of that is part of what the coaching staff needs to do. Also keep this in mind, that it's not just a matter of learning the offense and applying it to a defense. There's an emotional component to playing quarterback in the NFL, and especially for a guy like Will Levis. Remember that in college, his last year in Kentucky, he had a poor offensive line. His receivers from the year before were all off in the NFL. And when things started to go bad, Levis would just default to his fastball. He would just fire the ball in a laser, and he didn't have a whole lot beyond that. Well, he showed last year with the Titans that he was able to get beyond that in terms of not just defaulting to that. But part of his concern is that he is highly emotional. He is fired up. He is not like CJ Stroud of the Texans, where you look at him most of the time, you think he's disinterested in the game, almost like he's falling asleep. Same way with Joe Burrow, just so calm, right? Well, when you look at least outwardly, so calm. When you look at Will Levis this last year for the Titans, he was about to burst a lot of the times. Like, he was just so fired up. And once in a while, finally they'll make a big play and they'll win a game, and he'll just let it all out. And it's just like this eruption of a volcano, right? Well, learning how to manage that kind of emotion is something that the coaching staff will have to learn about him, and then manage it to the positive, so that it's not squashed, but that it doesn't come to dominate his game. And so you talk about the coaching around him. It's not just, okay, here's how you do your feet, and here's how you throw the ball, and here's how you read the safeties. It's also, how do you get the most out of the fact that this is an emotional guy without squashing those emotions and turn him into something he's not.
Trevor Matich is with us, presented by Houston Clinic Orthopedics, when experience matters. So Mel Kiper's new mock draft is out. The Titans are taking the left tackle Joe Alt out of Notre Dame in his mock draft. A lot of people think that is a foregone conclusion, and yet the Bengals did things a little different. We'll get Trevor's thoughts on that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Stillman and Company, Trevor Matich is with us, presented by Houston Clinic Orthopedics, when experience matters. I'm in a good mood because the Titans hired a coach, so I'm going to give away some tickets here. Be caller 5 at 615-737-1025, and you will win a pair of tickets before you can buy them to see Billy Currington and Kip Moore at Ascend Amphitheater on Saturday, May 18th. I may actually have to go to that, by the way. Tickets go on sale this Friday at 10 a.m. Okay, Trevor, so Mel Kiper Jr.'s latest mock draft comes out. And he's got the Titans taking Joe Alt, the left tackle at Notre Dame, with the 7th overall pick. Or I guess this is his first mock draft. Joe Alt at number 7 overall. And a lot of Titans fans are, give me the tackle from Notre Dame, give me the tackle from Penn State. The Bengals have rebuilt their offensive line on the fly. We all remember the 9 sacks the Titans had in the playoff game and still lost because Tannehill threw 3 picks. But they've done it through free agency. Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, Lyle Collins at one point, Orlando Brown. They have built, not one time have they used one of those first-round choices on an offensive lineman. And not only that, but they actually had the chance to draft Penei Sewell, and they went with Jamar Chase instead. Nobody, I think, can say that that was a bad choice. So when it comes to the Titans and building under Brian Callahan, what can you glean from what Cincinnati has done and what the Titans may have to do?
Bring in new people. I mean, that's what it starts with. You know, you talk about those free agents that they brought in. I mean, in 2021, it was an epically horrific offensive line for the Bengals, and yet they went to the Super Bowl. I think Burrow was sacked, 70 times? In that year, including in the postseason. It was just, but Burrow was able to overcome it, and the offensive brain trust was able to game plan around that bad offensive line by throwing the ball to the running backs and by having just phenomenal quarterback and receivers that could get open very quickly, even though the defense knew that they were going to be doing that. So you bring in new talent, then you have to develop them. That's the thing about offensive line, is that talent is mildly interesting, but it's the one position in football that is counterintuitive. I mean, everything else in football, for the most part, is what you did as a kid when you were running around on the field playing flag football or touch football. You know, you throw it, you catch it, you chase the guy with the ball. That's what you do. Offensive line is completely different, because in order to do it well, if you do what is natural to push somebody out of the way or stay between that guy and the quarterback, you're going to lose. You have to learn how to do unnatural things. And Mark Schlereth, who I was teammates with Washington back in the day, and then he went on to Denver and won Super Bowls, and now I think he's with Fox as a broadcaster. Great guy, great broadcaster. He said something interesting when he was at ESPN. He said that somebody said, well, what about the skill players, referring to quarterbacks and receivers, et cetera. And he said, skill players? He said, the offensive line is the skill players. He said, I can go down to the cafeteria right now, throw a football to anybody in there. They'll catch it and throw it back to me. But nobody in there will be able to move me somewhere that I don't want to go. To move a man somewhere against his will, that is skill. And that's the thing that Titans need. That's the thing that the Bengals did. They brought in new guys with more talent that they were able to develop into more skill. And then there's continuity, because one of the big things, I mean, from 21 to 22, when they brought in those new free agents, they drafted one guy in the 4th round, and they ended up by the end of the year being the offensive line with the most consecutive starts as a group in the NFL that year. They still weren't great, but there was a massive improvement. And so those are the 3 things. You've got development, talent, continuity. That's how the Bengals address their offensive line. That's what the Titans will need to do in order to match the improvement.
Do you think that his dad, Bill Callahan, the offensive line guru, do you think him coming over, which a lot of people seem to think will happen, do you think that that's a big deal?
Huge deal. Oh my gosh. If he comes, that would be enormous. He is, for one thing, he's one of the good guys in this game, but also he is one of the most skilled teachers of the game that I've ever seen. And part of the benefit of having an offensive line coach that's been around for that many decades is that he predates the up-tempo offenses. When Bill Callahan was coaching, Super Bowl teams with Washington, et cetera, offenses would huddle up. In practice, you had time to coach the techniques of the game to your players. Then things started to go up tempo, especially in college. And what they would do is coach the techniques off the film in the meeting room because they didn't have time to do it in practice during team drills, et cetera, because they were too busy practicing up tempo. They just didn't have time to do it. Now, it's not that the Titans are an up tempo team, they're not. But from a standpoint of being an old school teacher of the skills of how to play offensive line, the feet, the hands, et cetera, there's nobody on the planet that's better than Bill Callahan. And if he's able to come here, he will fit one of those three critical components of how to develop an offensive line, and that's to develop the skills, to teach the skills.
Do you think the Titans, Trevor, need, I think we know that they're going to have to use both the draft and free agency to improve the team. But do you, especially the line, but do you think that given Skoronski and maybe a rookie left tackle, that the Titans need a veteran offensive lineman, top of the market in free agency to come in here just so that there's a veteran guy in that room that can lead those people?
I'm not sure that they need top of the market necessarily, but they need to spend wisely in free agency. I think if they take a tackle at number 7 in the draft, then you're going to have a fantastic left side of the line with that guy and Peter Skoronski once they kind of get up to speed and get used to playing together at this level. Fantastic. But they still don't have enough guys. And the Bengals were willing to bring in buckets of free agents on the offensive line. And I think that Brian Callahan will see the same need and kind of try to do the same thing. But what you've got to avoid is spending too much money against the cap for guys that don't deserve the money. Jared, I've heard you talk a lot about how the Titans overpaid for Aaron Brewer at center. They could have gotten him for less, used the rest of that money somewhere else, about how they overpaid for Andre Dillard at left tackle and maybe even shouldn't have got him at all. Mm-hmm. You don't want to make the mistake of overpaying for somebody that can't play because then it's hard to replace them. So I think that you're going to see a lot of activity in free agency. Now, keep this in mind, too, that in this draft, offensive line, both tackle and guard, are two of the deepest positions in the draft. And the Titans have a pick near the top of the second round as well. Plus, they've got a couple late round picks from the A.J. Brown trade that they might be able to package to move up possibly into the late first round. And they might be able to draft a couple of starters right off the bat because of the depth of offensive line in this draft. And I expect them to be very active one way or the other, or both, draft and free agent, to address that offensive line.
Last one quickly for you. The offensive coordinator position under Brian Callahan is open. One, do you think that Liam Cohen at Kentucky should be in the mix given his relationship with Will Levis?
I think it would be good to have him in the mix because of that. Because remember, Levis has shown enough physically that he can be an outstanding quarterback in this league. For him now, it's all development mentally and emotionally that will allow him to maximize his physicality. And Cohen knows the guy. So that's one of the reasons he should be in the mix.
Okay. Trevor Matich, ESPN, presented by Houston Clinic Orthopedics, when experience matters. Trevor, great insight as always. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, Jared.
Yep. Trevor Matich, as always, on our program is presented by Houston Clinic Orthopedics. In fact, somebody said, Jared sounds like Trevor just described Tom Brady. Fired up, emotional, and seemed to work fine for him. I'll take that fire any day. Yes, but I do think there's a little, a little calm every now and then. So is Brian Callahan going to work out? Is he? We'll get to that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live up from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios. The Titans have hired Brian Callahan to be their head coach. So I sent out a tweet last night, Ian, that I knew people were going to take the wrong way.
Okay.
I said, if Brian Callahan becomes the next Bill Belichick and the Titans win 6 Super Bowls over the next 25 years, will Ryan Tannehill's 3-interception game against Cincinnati be the single most important thing in Titans history? What was the big word in all of that?
Would?
If,
yeah, some type of projection.
If that happens, and people are like, I'm going to remember this when you bust his ass over special teams. It's like, I don't expect it to happen. I'm just saying if the Bengals got put on the map, including Callahan, because they went to the Super Bowl in 2021. Why'd they go to the Super Bowl in 2021? Because Ryan Tannehill crapped his pants against the Bengals. It's well documented. We all know it. It's okay. But anywho, anytime something like this happens, people ask me, Jared, what do you think of the hire? And what they're really asking is, Jared, is this guy going to be the answer to our prayers? Same thing happened last year when they hired Rand Carthon. Same thing happened when they drafted Will Levis. And when they drafted Will Levis, I said, look, I like Will Levis. I mean, I didn't love him. I wouldn't have traded everything in order to get him, but I like Will Levis now. Like, I think he's got talent. And that's how I feel about Brian Callahan. I like Brian Callahan. But again, the question is, Jared, is he going to be the next great NFL coach? Is he going to be the answer to our prayers? And so when I first started working with Floyd, I always wanted those answers too. I mean, you're the football GM guru. And so I want to know, what do they need to do to make Marcus Mariota a franchise quarterback? Do you think Marcus can be the franchise quarterback? Do you think this guy's a great coach? Do you think this is a great draft choice? Do you think they should sign this guy? Do you think, and every time he'd say, I don't know. Almost, it used to piss me off. I used to be like, what are we talking about? You don't know. You're the GM. You're the guru. Now, he did make sure to tell us the right tackle story, and we've learned a lot about the right tackle position thanks to that story. But only when my best friend became a full-fledged doctor and was the chief resident in the ICU during COVID did I really realize that the answers to these things, even if you're an expert, they're really hard to figure out. I must have asked him every day. I'd say, when is this going to be over? And he'd say, I don't know. We don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? You're the doctor. You're the expert. What do you mean you don't know? Well, this is a new virus. We don't know a lot about it. We're trying to learn more about it, but the answer is we don't know. Okay? So when it comes to Brian Callahan, and is he going to be the next great NFL coach, I'm not copping out by saying, I don't know, we'll see. But that's how all these things are. That's how draft picks are. That's how GMs are. That's how coaches are. I mean, I've seen coaches hired that I knew were going to be successful fail. I've seen coaches hired where I laugh and I think they just went and got John Lynch out of the freaking TV booth to be the general manager of the San Francisco 49ers. And, well, they're doing a pretty good job in San Francisco. So all I can tell you is what sets the organization up best for success. And to me, the best for success is an offensive coach who runs the current form of the West Coast offense and to pair him with Will Levis. Is that going to work? Is Will Levis going to pop and be a franchise quarterback? I don't know. Levis has a lot of talent. Levis has a ton of arm talent. Levis is a fierce competitor. Levis has good size. He's athletic. He really does look the part of a more athletic Matthew Stafford. But he turns football over too much, he gets hurt. Are they going to be able to coach that out of him? I don't know. But what I do know is that this West Coast offense with this guru running it gives Will Levis a much better shot of having success than the Ray Perkins 1980 offense. No disrespect to Ray Perkins, may he rest in peace. Does Brian Callahan's background in player acquisition coming from the dirt poor Bengals, who barely have a scouting staff, matter to me? Given that I don't completely trust the GM here and that this team, quite frankly, has to be rebuilt? Yeah, it does. Do I trust a guy who's worked in the league for as long as Brian Callahan has, in as many different places as he has, which means different systems, different players, different personalities, and most importantly, different problems? Yes, it does. And with all those places he's worked in, does that make me think that Brian Callahan can come in here and hire a qualified and legitimate staff? A mixture of old dudes who know the way and young dudes who are on the rise who can be superstar assistant coaches? Yes, it does. So am I going to be able to develop Will Levis into this superstar? I don't know. I hope. But again, none of these experts know. And that's what I loved about the old man. In hindsight, it frustrated me on an opinion show to say, do you think this guy is the answer? I don't know. But it's also honest. That's how the league works. I've talked to these general managers, and I've said, what do you think about such a... And every time it's, I hope you're right. I mean, I hope. There's a lot of that. I hope. And there's a lot of anxiety about what could go wrong that's outside of their scope, or what mistake, it's a fork in the road. Do I do this? Do I do that? I don't know. I did this. I should have done that. Those things happen. So as with all things in life, the best anybody can possibly expect is to be prepared for success. Not to just know that success is going to happen, but to be prepared for it. That is what Brian Callahan is. At least that's what his resume says. So if you ask me, do I like the hire? Yeah, I like the hire. Was it my number one choice? No. But I do like the hire. But can I guarantee you that the Titans are going to win the Super Bowl with this guy as coach? No, I can't. Do I think that they are in a better spot today with a young quarterback than they were yesterday, than they were last month when Mike Vrabel was the coach? Yes, I do. So that should be the answer. Is this going to work? Again, I don't want to plead the fifth on this. I don't want to look soft. I don't want to stay out of it. But I don't know. And neither do you, and neither do they, and neither does he. But does he think he can do it? I bet he thinks he can. Do they think he can do it? I bet they think he can. And quite frankly, according to the resume and things I've seen I think he can do it. And I guess what I'm saying with this is, if this doesn't work out, I'm not going to look back at this and think, oh my God, what a freaking clown show disaster that was. I understand how they got to this. I understand why they got to this. And it makes sense to me. And if the process is correct, I think more often than not, you're going to get the results you want. It's when you fly off the reservation and draft guards with the 11th overall pick that I go crazy because I think you're incompetent. It's when you put guys back to return punts that have proven in the past, the one thing they're exceptional at is dropping the football. That's when I go crazy. But again, the way this search was executed, the way they moved on from Mike Vrabel, outside of that disastrous Rand Carthon press conference that preceded the coaching search, this has looked like a competent operation, a competent search, and it landed on a qualified candidate who should be what the Titans are looking for. And that's the best I think any of us can ask for. 615-737-1025 is our phone number if you want to weigh in. That's 615-737-1025. We will get to your phones. Plus, Charlie Weiss doesn't see where the Titans improved from Mike Vrabel to Brian Callahan. And I've got one word for him. We'll do that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106 The Game.
Look, I'm happy for Coach Callahan. You know, he's a well-respected guy. You just wonder how that's an improvement over Mike Vrabel. That's my only question there. I mean, I just don't see how you improved yourself. But they decided to go in a different situation, different structure, and you know, congratulations to them. And he's got a frontline quarterback and got some good talent to work with, and should be interesting.
There you go, Charlie Weiss this morning on Sirius XM NFL Radio saying, I don't see how they got better from the great Mike Vrabel to this. I don't see it. And for that, I have one word, and that word is scheme. That's the word. So right now, the Titans, with Tim Kelly as the offensive coordinator, run the Erhardt-Perkins offense, which is an old-school offense. It is the Bill Parcells offense, right? That's what they ran back in the day with the Giants when they won the Super Bowl with Jeff Hostetler as the quarterback. In fact, I think one of the benefits of the Erhardt-Perkins offense is that it doesn't necessarily matter who the trigger man is. At least that was the belief. Except that it did, because Tom Brady was an incredibly important person into the legacy of the Erhardt-Perkins offense. But that's the past. No disrespect, but both Erhardt and Perkins are dead. Now, that being said, I can't believe I just said that. But that being said, the West Coast offense, the Shanahan offense, which is a derivative from Bill Walsh, who has also passed us, but the Shanahan offense is today's offense that is in vogue in the NFL. And the big guy on the tree is Mike Shanahan. And then there are all the branches. And there was the first wave of Shanahan coaches, which includes Gary Kubiak, who is now at this point kind of like a grandfather. You know, when you see these family-owned businesses that, this started off the Marriott company, for instance. You go into a Marriott hotel, and there's a picture of dad who started it and son who's running it. And then I'm sure by now the great-grandson is running it, then the great-great-great-grandson. And, hey, this is Charlie Baker the Seventh, and he's the one who does it. That's where we are right now. With all of the kids, with the Shanahan kids, and McVay and LaFleur and McDaniel and Kevin O'Connell and Brian Callahan. That's where we are today. And it's the scheme. And so here's what the old man Gary Kubiak, who was on with Chase and Big Joe, said about this specific offense.
Everybody talks about, Coach Shanahan's way and how we did things and stuff. But, anything you're doing, anytime you're coaching in the NFL, you have to have a system. And that's the big thing. Mike had a tremendous system. He had a great way of teaching. How do you teach your system, in 8-day installations, 9-day installations. But you have to have something in place, running football plays and all those type of things. I think there's a lot of people do the same thing. But some people take it to a new level, and you take it to a new level because you're a good teacher, because you're creative, and that's what you've seen through the years. You're watching Kyle with all the movement he incorporates in offensive now, and Mike McDaniels, and you watch Matt LaFleur do a tremendous job of coaching, especially these last few weeks, of getting his football team in tremendous position. So I would say it comes with the best thing you're getting a great system that Brian knows exactly how he wants to teach it.
Bingo! These guys are taking it, and they're advancing it. Shanahan, LaFleur, McVay, O'Connell, McDaniel. They're all just advancing the system. I saw some of the plays the Dolphins ran this year where Tyreek Hill is running sideways at the snap, and it's like he's hidden behind the offensive lineman, and then Tyreek Hill just jitterbugs out there, and they throw an 80-yard touchdown to him. That's how you do this. That's where they upgraded from Mike Vrabel. And I heard today this idea that Joe got mad about, that Mike Vrabel's living in 1980s football. He wasn't with Matt LaFleur and Arthur Smith, but when he tried to go back to that Ray Perkins offense, that's what that is. That's peepop ball. And it's not getting any better. It gets better if you get Tom Brady. Well, what's more likely? That you're going to get Tom Brady, or that you're going to be able to run and continue on this system? And you know the answer. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. That's 615-737-1025. One texter says, and our phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHunter.com, are you worried that there has been no official head coaching announcement from the Titans just yet? No, I am not. But Let me throw a little butt under this. If Brian Callahan doesn't end up becoming the head coach of the Titans, oh, that's going to be weird. Oh, that's going to be bad. Like, I'm just telling you, it's gotten to the point now. You know, again, the Titans give their information to NFL Network. Like, the Adams family goes to NFL Network with their team. Rappaport, Pelissero, Garofolo. That's where they go. Have you noticed Diana hasn't had a lot to report on this search? Pelissero was the one who reported it, I think, first yesterday. Although Schefter has actually been very involved in the Titans lately, which I'm not used to, which I'm a little surprised by. Texter into the text line says nobody watches the Titans, so they think Vrabel is a good coach. But then they do research and realize he runs a team built for the 1990s, hires bad coordinators, and then they don't want him. You know, here's my thing about Vrabel. Again, I don't think that Vrabel himself lives in 1990 football because at one point Vrabel did have the number 2 offense in the NFL. The problem with Vrabel is that Vrabel is too freaking arrogant. That's the problem with Vrabel. And so he knows Tim Kelly knows what he's doing, and he knows that Craig Aukerman knows what he's doing, and he knows that Shane Bowen can run this deep. Like, that's the problem. And the reality is, not everybody's right all the time, and a broken clock is right twice a day. And with Vrabel, I think that he got too convinced, and John Robinson, same way. I think they got too convinced that they were right all the time and that there was to be no questioning of them, even though at one point Mike Vrabel had Derrick Henry on the depth chart behind David Fluellen. And as Joe reported very well in The Athletic, John Robinson didn't even want Derrick Henry and was talked into Derrick Henry by a guy in Blake Bedingfield who later he would fire. So you're not right all the time, folks. I'm just saying that. One texter says, is Derrick Henry more likely or less likely to stay with Brian Callahan as the coach? More likely or less likely than what? Who knows? One texter says, Charlie Weiss is a football dinosaur at this point. Of course, he can't see how a coach like Brian Callahan would be an upgrade over Mike Vrabel. Well, let's also not kid ourselves here. Charlie Weiss is inherently biased. He coached Mike Vrabel in New England. And I believe Vrabel would go on that show and then, oh, yeah, how's your family? Good, how's your family? So, you know, I think that Charlie, you know, was kind of like a, hey, let me get this out of the way so Mike doesn't think that I don't still love him kind of thing. But also when it comes to the scheme, which is part of the talk there, when it comes to the scheme, that's Charlie Weiss's scheme that the Titans are moving on from. And if Belichick gets a job in the NFL, my guess is Tim Kelly's going to have to be the offensive coordinator if it's not Josh McDaniels, because I don't think anybody else runs that scheme anymore. And Bill O'Brien's gone back to college. I actually read that the Browns have cleaned out their entire offensive coaching staff except for Bill Callahan, who still might be coming here, that they've cleaned out their entire offensive staff and that Tim Kelly may be the guy they go get for Deshaun. And I'm like, are you sure you want to do that? And then what would be great is if Bill Callahan comes here to work with Brian Callahan and Tim Kelly ends up going there and brings old buddy Hodling, ends up bringing him as the offensive line coach after they had the Bill Callahan sitting there. Jack Conklin goes down, no problem, put the third-round rookie in there. Okay. Jedrick Wills goes down, no problem, put the other rookie in there. Okay. And then all of a sudden they put Howdling in there, and now you got Aaron Brewer starting. Oh, it'd be just wonderful. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. 615-737-1025 if you want to weigh in. So I've got the Brian Callahan checklist because I actually think his job, instead of coach, I had a former NFL head coach tell me months ago, before Will Levis made his first start. I said, tell me about, you know, how this kind of thing. He said, well, the word for a coach in baseball is manager. And that's what a coach should be when it comes to dealing with a young quarterback, is it's more of a manager than it is a coach. You manage the young quarterback. So I think Brian Callahan's job is going to be to manage because they've got a young quarterback. So I've got the Brian Callahan checklist. And we'll do that next, and then we're to your phones. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. The question for you is what's best for Marcus?
Well, I mean, anytime you can keep things similar, it's going to help a young quarterback. Now, is it going to be exact? No, it won't. But if it's close enough that he doesn't have to learn an entirely new progression, read system, all of those, pass protections, it sounds silly, but play calls and what you're calling. I mean, if you go from a system where you're, like we've heard him call audibles, you go 781, 781, well, that may be a pass pattern. Well, if you go to a system now where you're going, king left, double wide out, zoom, Z cross, X post, Y out, halfback check flat, well, I mean, that's going to be a problem. And so I think you would like for a lot of that to be the same if you can. Now, that being said, I don't think Marcus would have any trouble learning any of that. I really don't. But that's not the question in my mind. The question in my mind is, how do we get Marcus good?
The old man 6 years ago, and the answer is, and I love Marcus, but you can't make Marcus good. You just can't. So I think we take all of that, apply it to now. As far as the terminology and the offense are concerned, I don't fear anything when it comes to Will Levis because he's played in that offense before. Liam Cohen is a Sean McVay disciple. Rich Scangarello, who, by the way, is probably the one guy who freaking sucked off the Shanahan tree. Rich Scangarello is a Kyle Shanahan disciple. Those were his two coaches in college. And so he knows that. So you're not going to be worried about changing up the terminology on him. Now, Spears and Skoronski and those guys might be a little different, but they're not quarterbacks. But the real question is, as the old man said, it's not about can Will Levis adjust to the new offense. It's how do they get him good? That's the question. And so I've got the Brian Callahan check because to me, this is all about the ability to manage Will Levis, to manage him both putting better players around him and everything else. And so I look at this almost like a flow chart of what Brian Callahan has to do. And then it leads from one thing to the next, and that is kind of the head coaching flow chart checklist for him in terms of making this work, being the answer to Titan fans and Amy Adams Strunk's prayers. So let's start, of course, at the very, very top.
Number 1.
Make Will Levis a franchise quarterback. How many franchise quarterbacks exist in the NFL today? And I mean true franchise guys. 5. Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar, Allen. Am I missing anybody? There's the group of guys that, man, I love Justin Herbert, and I think with better coaching around him, Herbert could take that step. Matthew Stafford probably was that, but he's not. He's too old now. Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, but I mean teams that look at that quarterback and they put their arms around him and say, I love him and I don't want anybody else. And right now, that's what Matt LaFleur is doing with Jordan Love. Aaron Rodgers, too old in New York. So right now, there's about 4 guys. Brock Purdy came out and said that Kyle Shanahan sat down with him and said, hey, you're going to be our starter in 2023 unless Tom Brady decides he would like to play a year for the 49ers. So that tells me how much they think of him. So again, true franchise guys. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar. You see what I'm saying? Burrow. Herbert, I think, probably belongs in there, but who knows? So that's the first step, is to make Will Levis a franchise guy. Now, how do you do that?
Number 2.
Figure out the right staff for Levis and the right support staff for Levis. So that means the right offensive coordinator. People say, I want Thomas Brown to be the offensive coordinator. I want Liam Cohen to be the offensive coordinator. I want Charles London to stay as the quarterback coach. Maybe, but is that the right support staff for Will Levis? Who would be the best good cop if Brian Callahan's going to be a bad cop? I heard TD bring up that Orlando Brown, the offensive lineman of the Bengals, said that it was Brian Callahan that got into them in the middle of the season and called them out and really pushed them before they went to San Francisco and they beat the Niners? Well, is that because he's the bad cop? I heard C.J. Stroud talk about his relationship with Gerard Johnson, the quarterback's coach, and Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator. One guy, the quarterback's coach, told him he needed to be more confident. Stay confident, be more confident, believe in yourself. Slowick, the offensive coordinator, was the one who was always being hard on him. Good cop, bad cop. So what's the right staff for Levis? What's the right structure? And it's not just offensive coordinator and quarterback's coach, but it's the right offensive line coach to be able to, really get the offensive line and the quarterback on the same page. Same with receivers. So it's not just about one or two guys, but it's probably more about 8 to 10 guys as far as, again, we're trying to make Will Levis the franchise guy. What's the right staff to be able to do that?
Number 3.
Farm out the defense and special teams to people that will take good care of it so you just don't have to worry about it. Green Bay, for instance, has Rich Bisaccia as their special teams coach. They got to figure out the kicker position. But they've got Rich Bisaccia as a special teams coach, and Matt LaFleur doesn't touch the defense. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know who the defensive coordinator is going to be, but it's going to be something a la the way that Vic Fangio runs the Dolphins defense, the way that Steve Wilkes runs the 49ers defense, the way that Raheem Morris runs the Rams defense. One name I'd keep in mind, and I already know you guys are going to poo-poo this, but one name I'd keep in mind is Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley's very analytical, and Brandon Staley coached that Rams defense. And so you can farm out that side of the ball to Brandon Staley. I wouldn't mind if they kept the current special teams coach, Tom Quinn. He's got like 30 years of experience doing this, and I liked him fine. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But again, that's just farm that stuff out. Don't worry about it.
Number 4.
Make sure to hire an offensive coordinator that can balance whatever side of the yin and the yang Brian Callahan is with him. Again, they're not bringing in an offensive coordinator to call plays. They're not bringing in an offensive coordinator to install an offense. They're not bringing in an offensive coordinator to design the offense. They're bringing in an offensive coordinator to balance out and support Brian Callahan, because Brian Callahan is the one who's doing all of that stuff. So it's like, no. I'm going to run the offense. I'm going to call the plays. I'm going to install the offense. I'm going to be right there with the quarterback. But that doesn't mean that every one of those guys doesn't need a number 2. I read an article about what went wrong between Sean McVay and Jared Goff a couple of years ago. And what it really resulted in was when Matt LaFleur was there, he was the buffer between McVay and Goff. Then when LaFleur left, Zach Taylor stepped in. But then when Zach Taylor left, they didn't have that, and it was McVay directly with Goff. And quite frankly, McVay couldn't stand the mistakes Goff would make, and Goff couldn't stand the way McVay would coach him. And it didn't work. And so whatever side of the equation Brian Callahan's on with the quarterback, the OC has to be the other guy. And so that's a big step in this. What you can't do is hire somebody who's going to be exactly like you, and then it feels like you got 2 guys beating down on the quarterback or 2 guys that are sitting there kissing the quarterback's ass. Can't have that.
Number 5.
Show authority and competence from the very, very beginning. Now, don't be too big of an a-hole or try to act like the smartest guy in the room. But just make sure everybody knows this is your program. I got to say, I don't think Rand did himself any favors when he got up there and didn't answer any of those questions a couple weeks ago, because it looked like he really had no authority on this. Somebody texted in and said, now that they've hired Callahan, Jared, do you feel better about Rand? And the answer is, how much of this was Rand? I don't know. Why? Because Rand opened the door for us to question his authority. So when it comes to Brian Callahan, yes, there's a structure in place. Yes, you answer to the owner. Everybody answers to the owner. But show ownership of the team. That's very, very important. And then accountability. Show people that you can put your hand in the air and say, I screwed that up. And the very best of what they do can do that. But also, don't try to look like the smartest guy in the room all the time.
Number 6.
Do what got you here. Don't just change everything about myself because I'm the head coach now. Don't do that. But also know that visibility and responsibility is not the same as it was as a coordinator. I think about that in my own career, right? So when I was in Louisville on the radio, I was the sidekick, kind of like what Caroline was to me. I was the sidekick to Drew Diener. But I was opinionated. I stirred the pot. I brought the heat. I felt like I was developing topics, all those things. Then all of a sudden, it becomes my show, and there's a little bit more responsibility. But that doesn't mean change what got me there. And so Brian Callahan, and I'm sure he's smart enough, and it's a good thing that, again, his dad has this experience. Don't just change everything because I've got to be the head coach now. Don't worry about that. Do what got you here. 615-737-1025. We'll roll through your phones here on Stillman and Company. Window Nation. Boy, it's starting to actually get hot in my house. I might need to check that out now that it got warm outside again, and now the sun's hitting the window, and so I'm going to have to do the hand test again because I didn't have a lot of the cool air getting into my home, but I am starting to get a little bit of that heat into my home. And so, again, go to windownation.com. But if you're somebody that looks at your windows and you say, man, that looks like an old window right there, and I've been thinking about replacing that window, and honestly, I'm probably going to sell the house in a couple of years, so I should probably get it done now. Window Nation is who you need to talk to because those windows are more affordable than you think. That's right. 50% off all window styles. No interest for 5 years. So don't wait. Do it now. Go ahead and give Window Nation a call. And just, again, if it's because you want to lower those energy bills, if it's because you want to make your house better looking and probably more value when you sell, whatever it could be, update those windows. Again, no interest for 5 years and 50% off all window styles. Do not wait. Simply call 866-90NATION or visit windownation.com.
Coach Callahan, he worked with Joe Burrow, and Joe threw for like 80-some plus touchdowns, there in Cincinnati when Brian was there. They also, played in the Super Bowl. Callahan has worked with Peyton Manning. He's worked with Matthew Stafford. He's worked with Derek Carr. I mentioned Joe Burrow. So I think he has a track record and the ability to work with young quarterbacks. And I know the Tennessee Titans have Will Levis, who's a young quarterback who certainly could use the tutelage to continue to learn how to play the position in the National Football League and play it at a very high level. So I think he'll bring that experience. And then also, too, what he did with Jake Browning. Callahan did with Jake Browning this year. And to get him ready, to have him go out there and perform at the level that he played at. So I think when you factor all that in, particularly being able to work with young quarterbacks, I think that had a significant role in the hire there with the Tennessee Titans.
There you go. That was Torrey Holt on SiriusXM NFL Radio. One texter says that, I know how to get a good franchise quarterback, Jared. Draft someone who won the Heisman Trophy, took his team to the college championship, won. Yeah, that's Joe Burrow. Someone should say, I know Joe Burrow, and Will Levis is no Joe Burrow. Or the Titans go get a Tom Brady like Tampa Bay did. But let's wake up, Nashville. Here's the thing about these young quarterbacks. Nobody knows. Nobody knows after year one what a guy's going to be or what they're not going to be. Carson Wentz had a fine rookie season. They were 7-9, and then the next year he lit it up and was league MVP before he tore his ACL. And then he became Carson Wentz. Jalen Hurts, after his first full year as a starter, Philadelphia tried to acquire Russell Wilson to be their starting quarterback. They failed. Then Jalen Hurts ended up in the Super Bowl. They gave him a $52 million contract, and now it looks like Jalen, again, still a young quarterback, starting to maybe regress a little bit. I mean, the truth is, when it comes to these franchise quarterbacks, that's why Trevor Lawrence this time last year, he's the next one. I was like, wait a minute, what? Are we talking about the same guy? Everybody's doing that now for Stroud. Now, I think Stroud is going to be that guy. But I'm not ready to rule out Will Levis. Growth happens at the position. Jordan Love is the perfect example of growing a quarterback and doing it the right way. Love, he plays quarterback out there, and I was listening to our broadcast of the Cowboys game, and Danny White, the old quarterback, was talking about how he was watching Jordan Love, and it looked like just the mannerisms, the way he ran the offense, everything. He's like, I'm watching Aaron Rodgers. That wasn't what Jordan Love looked like 2 years ago. Coaching and development matters. That's the whole point of getting this guy. Is he going to be Joe Burrow? Lord, I hope. Do I think he's going to be Joe Burrow? No. But again, the whole point of coaching is to maximize talent. That's why you have a coach. And so that's the hope here, is that is what this is going to be. Mark in Nashville, who's Joe's biggest supporter on Jared versus Joe, texted into the text line where we were talking about franchise quarterbacks and said, what about Jared Goff? Mark, I love you, but come on now. Like, we're talking about Mahomes and Allen and Lamar right now. And Lamar I'm still a little skeptical on, but Lamar is playing great. Texter says, Jared, you cannot make a star quarterback. He has to be born with it. What about Jordan Love? It looks like Jordan Love is trending in that direction, right? I'm not ready to sit there and say, Jordan Love's a franchise guy. Foot down. But Jordan Love looks like he's on that path. He has to be born with it. I just think the first order of business for the new coach is to draft a quarterback because Levis is a bad risk. He is easy to get injured, and if he gets hurt, you'll be right back in the same position as last season with a new coach. I wouldn't chance it. Well, I think part of the job was, hey, explain to me what the plan for Levis is. And the owner is saying that when she sits down with Mike Keith and says, hey, fans, we have a young quarterback. We have a young quarterback that we can operate with. Texture says, tell that one guy about Tim Tebow winning championships and Heismans. Let me say this, man. Joe Burrow is that dude. I freaking love Joe Burrow. One texter says, if Callahan comes in and Levis pops, do we start to question whether Ran is a natural and that it was Vrabel holding the organization back? Absolutely. How we feel about Mike Vrabel in terms of the history books will basically be dictated by what Brian Callahan does. And same with Ran Carthon. And what comes next for this franchise? If they start winning Super Bowls, we'll say, great that they fired him. If not, we'll say, and they had Mike Vrabel and they fired him. And then, of course, part of that equation, too, is what Vrabel ends up doing next. But, yes, I mean, the narrative that's about to come out from the people that cover the team, the people that told us all about the salary cap and how it's not Vrabel's fault, and now they're saying it will be that Vrabel, that Ran was dictated to Vrabel, or was trying to placate to Vrabel, and that Vrabel was the one that was pushing things apart. And I don't completely believe all of that. I believe some of it. There is one tweet I want to read. Yesterday, we had everybody, the guy that runs the Over the Cap website, Ian, that came out and said that the cap wasn't fake, but so now there's two cap websites. There's Over the Cap and there's Spotrac.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it does any good for a cap guy who runs a cap site to tell everybody that the cap's fake. That doesn't seem like a very good idea. So Spotrac, the guy who runs that, had a tweet today that said, quote, the Packers just took the second highest dead cap in history from Aaron Rodgers and made the divisional round of the playoffs. Claiming a team's window of contention is closing because their quarterback holds a large cap figure next season is reckless. Any team that wants to free up cap space will.
Pretty much.
I mean, so now the guy who runs the cap site is telling us the cap's fake, right?
Well, easily maneuverable, yes.
I mean, again, it doesn't, the whole point of does the salary cap exist? Is it something that is technically on the ledger? Sure, I'll say that. But it's like a shell company. It's not real. None of these teams make decisions based off the cap. And some of you are getting smarter about that. Some of you are just too ignorant to actually look at how it doesn't actually affect teams. And you know what's funny, Ian, is I think Joe's realized that, but he won't let it go. He won't let it go.
Maybe in time.
Chase and Big Joe up next. Stillman and Company. We'll see you all tomorrow at 2.